The hope of everlasting love and loyalty can be enthralling, especially when you've never had it before.
She was pretty much abandoned by her parents, her siblings, the system.
He was the only one truly by her side, and she loved him.
But an unexpected betrayal can take even the most perfect relationship down a dark and twisted path.
One morning, it all kind of went to hell in a handbasket. There's a heated argument between the two. There's a struggle over the knife.
It looks skeletal to me.
I was shocked more than anything. I couldn't believe it.
That's when everything really took a drastic turn in the case.
She felt that she had his back. I think in her mind, she hoped he would do the same for her.
When you're afraid of losing the one who is stuck by your side, you just might lose it all.
I think that really kind of sent her over the edge.
She, in her mind, did what she had to do.
Summer 2020, Waterbury, Connecticut. 2 hours north of New York City, Waterbury is Connecticut's own little melting pot.
It's a city with lots of generational presence here, but it's also been a city that's been very welcoming and inclusive of people coming from other countries.
On Monday, July 13th, residents in this diverse city are enjoying a warm summer afternoon when the Waterbury Police Department receives an urgent 911 call.
Waterbury Police, how can I help you?
Yes, I'm calling because we can't get hold of my friend.
The Waterbury Police Department received a call regarding a missing individual.
Malik Ibarra, a Staten Island, New York resident, informs officers that he is unable to get in contact with his girlfriend, who lives in Waterbury.
Okay, and how long have you been trying to reach your friend?
I last spoke to her on Friday night.
Was there anything wrong?
Malik stated that they had an argument a couple days prior in Staten Island, and he's been trying to get in touch with her since and has had no luck.
So he asked officers to go out to her residence and basically do a welfare check to check on her to make sure she's okay.
And what's her name?
Lerato Pimentel.
Lerato Rachel Sabatella was born in July 1987 in a small town in South Africa. From an early age, she loved helping and caring for others.
Lerato means love, and that's what Rachel was. She was love. Rachel was beautiful inside and out.
In 2012, at the age of 25, Rachel moves to the United States for a job opportunity and to further her education.
While overseas, Rachel always remained in communication with her parents.
Everything that Rachel did was because she wanted to make her parents proud.
Rachel eventually found a job in New York City as a live-in nurse's aide and worked in Staten Island.
Rachel was very patient. Her clients had a lot of difficulties, so she was more like a friend or like a family taking care of another family member. She never treated it like a job.
Rachel's job often meant she'd spend long periods of time away from home.
She was a CNA, and she pretty much traveled around the area helping patients in need, oftentimes staying there with them in their homes while they recuperated.
Although she stayed busy, in 2014, Rachel managed to find time for love.
Before long, Rachel met and started dating Malik Ibarra.
But then her career sent her to Waterbury, Connecticut, about 2 hours north.
Rachel receives a job offer and ends up moving to Connecticut with a roommate.
Unfortunately, the distance was tough on the relationship, and she and Malik would see each other on and off. Right before her 33rd birthday, Rachel was excited to take a few weeks off of work to go visit him.
In July, I called her on her birthday. She said she's going to New York to spend time with Malik. I was like, oh, that's great. You know, I'm really glad that you guys are fixing things and, you know, it sounds like it's all going well. And she was like, yeah.
But now, Rachel's boyfriend, Malik, is worried after not hearing from her for 2 days.
You know, she didn't call. Her phones are off.
Waterbury officers head to Rachel's apartment to check on her. And there's no answer at the door.
They spoke to a couple neighbors. The neighbors didn't report anything out of the ordinary.
The officers then attempt to call Rachel's phone several times, but it goes straight to voicemail.
The officers used a building super to get into the apartment, to check the apartment.
When they were inside, they didn't notice any signs of disturbance at the time. We also learned that Rachel was a home health aide individual who would spend long periods of time away from her apartment. We did speak with her place of employment. Nobody really had heard from her for a few days, so it wasn't necessarily out of the ordinary.
Erring on the side of caution, they put her in the NCIC system as missing.
Over the next few weeks, officers receive more concerned calls from Rachel's friends and family, who are also unable to contact her.
What got me really worried was that Rachel's mom cannot contact Rachel. So that's when I knew that something is not right.
More than a month after Rachel's boyfriend reported her missing, officers receive a shocking phone call from Rachel's roommate.
On August 29th of 2020, her roommate returned home. She had been trying to contact Rachel throughout that month, had been able to do so.
She's also a home health aide, so she's away from the apartment for extended period of time as well.
She noticed something is not right. There's things missing, there's things out of place. She believes something could be terribly wrong with Rachel.
On her, and police did a welfare check. Now, Rachel's roommate has returned to their Waterbury, Connecticut apartment and called police after a troubling discovery.
That she had some cleaning supplies that were missing, and there was a mop missing as well.
When she went to do some cleaning, what immediately caught her attention was an area underneath the kitchen sink. It had a substance there that appeared to be blood to her.
So at this point, the detectives get involved in the investigation. We also have our forensic unit with us, and they were able to swab the substance underneath the sink.
They determined that that substance was in fact blood, so we were able to obtain a search warrant for that apartment.
The police use luminol and find multiple spots of blood on the kitchen floor.
This suggests that something sinister may have happened in the kitchen and someone tried to clean up.
We noticed that there's contents from Rachel's purse that are kind of dumped out onto a couch in a living room area.
There still wasn't much to go on, so the police were working on that theory that something happened to her.
In an effort to narrow down her whereabouts, detectives collect her iPad.
We were able to go through it, and we do notice a series of photos that Rachel had taken of herself.
Rachel must have recently gotten her nails done and posted a photo of a unique colored nail polish she had on her nails.
They also find on her iPad that she had hired a ride from Staten Island to Waterbury the night Malik last saw her.
So we were able to confirm that she did make her way back to the city of Waterbury.
Investigators request her cell phone records and those of her boyfriend Malik Ibarra as well.
That last person who talked to her was obviously Malik, had gotten into a verbal altercation with her prior to him reporting her missing, so that's where our focus was shifted at that point.
when Malik's phone records come in, detectives are in for a shock.
We were able to determine from Malik's cell phone records that he never left New York. He remained in New York, never came to Waterbury.
For 2 more weeks, investigators come up empty in their search for Rachel. Then, on September 12th, police in Watertown, a neighboring city, get a distressing call from a man out hiking in Black Rock State Park.
Watertown Police Dispatch.
I'm hiking in Black Rock.
You're in Black Rock?
Yeah, I think I found a dead body.
Watertown police respond to the park and meet the hiker at the bottom of an embankment.
They confirmed the discovery that the hiker had made. At this point in time, there's no indicators telling either the Watertown police or the state police who that individual may be.
It looks skeletal to me. It definitely appears to be human. We got a shirt. We got a body cavity over here. Feet tied up. And it looks like he's running.
They're aware that we're also working a missing persons case, so they contact us. Members of the Waterbury Police Detective Bureau respond out to that scene as well.
Waterbury investigators see the body is wrapped in a series of blankets and black trash bags with red ties.
The body was badly decomposed. It's really just skeletal remains. There was nothing really identifiable on the body itself.
But there is a shirt and pink bra around the rib cage, suggesting the remains are of a female.
I don't see a head. Sir.
But right there next to the body were very distinctive fingernails, the same fingernails that were seen in a photograph that Rachel had taken of herself on her iPad.
So obviously he immediately thought that this could be Rachel there.
They call in cadaver dogs, and they locate the skull in the same general area.
Those remains were then sent to the state medical examiner's office where an autopsy was conducted.
The next day, through DNA, the remains are confirmed to be Rachel. The medical examiner believes Rachel was killed months earlier, and the head was removed post-mortem, likely by animals.
The body is so badly decomposed that the medical examiner can't be for sure, but he believes that the body was stabbed multiple times in the torso.
He finds injuries to the diaphragm, and using the clothing that is still on her, he finds at least 18 stab holes.
Seeing how many times Rachel was stabbed, it's no secret that was a crime of passion. There was some serious anger that went into that crime.
To investigators, the killer is likely someone that knew Rachel well.
The samples from the blood that were under the sink, those were eventually compared to another DNA profile of Rachel, and it came back to be the same blood.
Detectives are now confident that she was killed in her own apartment, and then her body was dumped at Black Rock Park.
And that became a full-fledged murder investigation.
We really had to hit the ground running to determine what happened to her.
I was shocked more than anything. I was like, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that something so tragic had happened to her. It didn't make sense to me, because the last time I spoke to her, she was in New York. How is she even in Waterbury or Watertown? And it didn't make sense to me. I was so devastated. I feel like she hadn't even started to live her life. She was just starting out. I was so heartbroken.
Reported her missing.
The medical examiner identifies at least 18 stab wounds.
On September 15, 2020, investigators get a new lead in the case when Rachel's cell phone records come in.
When she came back home, we were able to determine sometime around midnight she received another phone call.
That phone number is identified as Miles Johnson's phone number.
Investigators look into Miles Johnson and find that he has no criminal record.
He was also a home health aide. He lived at home with his mother and his sister, and he came from a pretty happy family, and he was a hard worker.
So at this point, we now know that Miles Johnson was the last person to speak with Rachel, so we obviously want to make contact with him.
On September 18th, investigators reach out to the 22-year-old, and he agrees to come in.
When investigators speak with Miles Johnson, they don't give him an indication that Rachel is dead.
He was very calm, cool, collected.
Miles says he met Rachel in 2018 when they worked together.
He tells us that he currently has a girlfriend, but he's also been in a dating relationship with Rachel as well. He started off as co-workers, and then the relationship at work eventually turned sexual, and they have been dating for a period of time.
Miles admits that their relationship was off and on since early 2020, despite the fact that they both had partners.
He then told me that at one point he was at home with his girlfriend and they received a call from Rachel's boyfriend. Apparently Rachel's boyfriend had found out that Miles and Rachel had been in a sexual relationship. And Rachel's boyfriend started to tell the two of them that Rachel is now pregnant.
He also made it aware that he, at this time, had AIDS and that they should get tested because they too may have AIDS now.
So basically the boyfriend kind of blew up the whole situation of kind of like the love triangle that was going on at the time.
So all these things make a recipe for the most important key element, which is motive.
Miles tells detectives that after that, he decided to end the relationship with Rachel, but the two agreed to remain friends.
So when we did confront him about that phone call at midnight with Rachel, he did acknowledge making the call, but he just said it was very brief. She sounded distraught, and the phone call ended basically immediately.
He says he hasn't heard from her since, but has been getting texts from friends about her missing.
He does not admit to having any involvement in her disappearance.
In fact, he says he was with his girlfriend, 23-year-old Cassandra Nazario, that weekend. Cassandra Nazario came from the Bronx, New York, and had a brother and older sister.
Cassandra and her siblings were in foster care their entire childhood. Despite being raised in the system, Cassandra was kind to everyone.
Then, in 2006, Cassandra's aunt moved the children to foster care in Waterbury, Connecticut.
But eventually Cassandra and her siblings were separated, leaving her on her own in her group home.
She was pretty much abandoned by her parents, her siblings, the system, essentially.
But Cassandra never let this bring her spirits down. Once she was old enough, Cassandra finally went out on her own.
She had her own apartment, she had a job, and she always wanted to be in a field where she could help people and help animals.
She worked hard to support herself, but instead of becoming a veterinarian, she became a certified nursing assistant. While her professional life was soaring, Cassandra's love life was far behind. Until 2018, when she met 20-year-old Miles Johnson at work.
Miles was a CNA also, and seemed like a good kid. You know, never really got into trouble.
I knew Miles because he worked at the same facility as us. Miles was friendly. He would greet, here and there. He was hardworking.
She was in love, and she just enjoyed being in a relationship with him.
Soon, Miles became the most important person in her life.
I think she just wanted so badly to have a family of her own.
She felt that all she had was Miles, and he was the only person she could truly rely on.
Now, Waterbury police are looking into her boyfriend for murder, since he was the last person to speak with Rachel.
So once we get done with that interview, we also applied for a search and seizure warrant for Miles's phone records and his location at the time. And when we received his phone records, that's when everything really took a drastic turn in the case.
Suspect Miles Johnson.
Investigators discovered that the last call made to Rachel on July 11th was from Miles Johnson.
He admits to the sexual relationship with Rachel. And he explains to us that Malik was able to reach out to him and his girlfriend, where now this relationship gets brought to light. It's out of the bag now.
And that's when investigators get their biggest lead yet. From his cell phone.
We were able to track his location, where he was on that night in question.
Detectives see that Miles's phone was in the direct vicinity of Rachel's apartment on July 11, even though he says he was nowhere near the area.
We continued to follow locations of the phone throughout the night, and the locations went from 56 Johnson Street right to Black Rock State Park, where the remains were found. Once we have that information, we pretty much immediately go back to Miles Johnson's house. Asked him if he would respond back to the police department with us again.
Once there, investigators waste no time confronting him with what they know.
And he wasn't really able to provide any good story as to why his phone was at Rachel's at the time, or why it was over at Black Rock State Park. He was saying things like, oh, my phone must have been hacked or somebody gotten a hold of it.
Miles attempts to stand by his original alibi, insisting that he was at home with his girlfriend the entire time.
At this point in time, we had enough probable cause to apply for and were in fact granted an arrest warrant for Miles' arrest, charging him with the murder of Rachel.
Detectives next focus their attention on Cassandra, unsure of how much she may be involved.
On September 23, 2020, investigators asked Cassandra to come in for questioning.
She was pretty tight-lipped about everything. She was very upset. We remember her crying that night, but she really wouldn't get into too many details. Eventually, Cassandra did not want to speak with detectives, and she ended up leaving.
In search of physical evidence, the next day, detectives search Miles's home.
Their investigators find Rachel's keys and a couple of her belongings in Miles's apartment. They also locate the same type of duct tape that Rachel's remains were found in.
There was also garbage bags that seemed to be the same ones that were used to wrap up Rachel's body.
They find a fire pit in the backyard, but there's nothing in it.
After wrapping up their search, investigators return to the station, only to encounter an unexpected surprise.
Miles Johnson is brought back up to the detective bureau, and he asks to speak with me again.
He provides investigators with a very bizarre depiction of what went on that night, but claims he actually wasn't the one who killed Rachel.
He essentially put the blame on Cassandra, that she was the one that went in there and killed Rachel.
Miles claims that when Cassandra learned of the affair, he was consumed by guilt and decided to end his relationship with Rachel once and for all.
He stated that that evening he wanted to go to Rachel's apartment and kind of talk things out with her. Cassandra came for the ride as well, but Miles was the only one that entered the apartment. He stated that he was just trying to kind of talk things out with Rachel, but she got very agitated and became very aggressive.
He admits that there's a heated argument between the two, where at some point Rachel grabs a knife. There's a struggle over the knife.
And then Rachel ends up getting stabbed in the neck. But the way he describes it, he kind of acts it out physically as if she kind of plunges the knife into her own neck.
At this point, Miles says he panics. He believes that Rachel probably could have been saved and taken to the hospital. But at this point, Cassandra comes into the apartment.
Miles then claims that Cassandra immediately grabbed the knife and she stabbed Rachel repeatedly, killing her. But detectives have a hard time believing his story.
So at this point, Miles is obviously deflecting.
Provides a few more details about the cleanup and admits to bringing Rachel down to Black Rock and dumping the body.
We now know they were both there at the time of the homicide. They both had some role in Rachel's death, so it was enough for us to get an arrest warrant for her as well.
Later that day, investigators bring Cassandra in.
We informed her that she was under arrest.
Detective Brownell was able to explain to her, how we got to her at this point, where this information came from, and she was quite shocked.
During Cassandra's first interview, it was clear that she was trying to protect Miles in some capacity. But once she realized that Miles was trying to put the murder on her, she immediately got very angry and basically said that I'm not going down for him.
Her mindset immediately changed, and she felt that if he's going to tell on her, it's now her time to say exactly what happened.
Stabbing murder of Rachel Sabatella. He tells detectives it was actually his girlfriend, Cassandra Nazario, who killed Rachel.
When detectives arrest her, she decides to talk.
She's stating out loud that they did a very bad thing. She knows how terrible it was. They didn't need to do it.
She says it all started on July 10th.
One morning, it all kind of went to hell in a handbasket. Cassandra started receiving these weird, strange text messages from Rachel's boyfriend, Malik, saying that Miles was cheating on her with Rachel. Rachel was pregnant, and she had AIDS, so they might have AIDS now.
Heartbroken, Cassandra says she didn't know what to do. But later that night, around midnight, Miles asked her to join him for a drive.
She didn't really know where she was going, but they ended up at Rachel's. Miles goes into the apartment, but she waits outside. And when she goes into the apartment, she sees that Rachel is on the floor.
She's obviously suffered some stab wounds.
Miles is on top of her, and there's blood everywhere. I remember her stating that she didn't know that a human can actually bleed that much.
However, despite the horrifying scene, Rachel was still somehow alive and struggling to breathe.
She then stated that at one point Miles was telling her to get a pillow. So she goes into a bedroom, gets a pillow, and Miles ends up suffocating her with the pillow.
There's a panic that ensues then, and she does describe that they have to move her body in an effort to clean the crime scene.
Johnson put on latex gloves and told Cassandra to put on gloves too.
And then the two of them taped up Rachel's hands and feet. Cassandra remembered that she wanted to put a plastic bag over Rachel's head because she couldn't look at her face while they were doing this.
And then she details how they were able to basically wrap Rachel up in some types of bags.
Cassandra says they took blankets from the bed to cover her in.
and then proceeded to clean up Rachel's apartment for about the next 3 or 4 hours. Once they have Rachel wrapped up, they end up putting her in the back of Miles's SUV.
Miles then grabbed Rachel's keys and some of her personal belongings.
They emptied out Rachel's purse onto a couch. They tried to make it look like she had just left the apartment, left in a hurry, trying to throw police and investigators into a different direction of the investigation.
They drive her to Black Rock State Park, where, in the area of a guardrail, she describes how Miles pushes her down a little embankment.
From there, the two get back into the vehicle, and once they're back at Miles's residence, she describes how there's a fire pit in the backyard, and they took all their clothing and some of the items they used and ended up burning it in that fire pit.
However, Cassandra doesn't know what Miles did with the murder weapon.
So at this point, now having the version of events that she'd provided, we felt more likely that those were probably the truest events that actually occurred.
Cassandra appears very remorseful.
She knew that they had done something horrific, and she really wanted to do everything she could at that moment to make it right, and I believed her.
Miles Johnson and Cassandra Nazario are both charged with the murder of Rachel Sabatella. They are also charged with burglary and tampering with evidence.
With these charges, they each could receive more than 100 years in prison.
Prosecutors working the case offer them both a plea bargain, but Miles turns it down. Cassandra, on the other hand, agrees to cooperate.
She wanted to enter into a plea bargain where she would testify against Miles Johnson. We did what's called a proffer, where what they say in there can't be used against them. The incentive for them is to be completely truthful.
Cassandra shocks them with the final version of what really happened.
She had indicated that she had been far more involved in the murder than we had known.
Cassandra came from a really difficult background where she and her siblings had felt abandoned early in their lives. And now through this one crime, there are multiple families that have now been permanently harmed by that bad decision of Cassandra allowing her love for Miles to get in the way of making a decision that could have kept Rachel alive. Cassandra may have gone along with the plan because she loved Miles, and she had come from a place of abandonment and brokenness, and Miles may have used that to his advantage.
Nazario are headed to trial for the murder of Rachel Sabatella. Cassandra attempts to work out a plea deal with prosecutors. In exchange for her cooperation, and since she wasn't the one wielding the murder weapon, Cassandra is offered a reduced charge of manslaughter. After accepting these terms, Cassandra once again enters the interrogation room. But no one is ready for what she says next.
She had indicated that she had been far more involved in the murder than we had known. So the morning that Rachel's boyfriend had contacted Miles Johnson and Cassandra Nazario, there was a discussion, an argument between Cassandra and Miles.
Obviously, it was upsetting to get that phone call from Malik about the affair, the pregnancy, the AIDS. You know, it was a shock to them. And Miles was upset with Rachel.
Cassandra told the state that Miles said something to the effect, "This has to die," and that was when the plan was set in motion. They go to 3 different stores. They buy black clothes to wear. They buy the knife that was used to kill her.
Cassandra claims they then went to Rachel's apartment.
Miles went into the apartment. First, Cassandra had waited outside. He was in there for a while by Cassandra Nazario's account, and he initially attacks her, gives her significant injuries.
Cassandra says when she entered, she saw Rachel on the floor with a knife in her face.
But she was still making verbal sounds, and Miles Johnson told her to stab her.
She really stated that she felt very betrayed by Miles. She felt that she was a very good girlfriend to him, really did whatever he wanted, and he repays her by having a sexual relationship behind her back. So I think that really kind of sent her over the edge. She kind of jumped into this murder with 2 feet.
Cassandra Nazario then took a knife, tried to stab her, and didn't really know how to do it. Miles Johnson helped her with the first 2 stab wounds by holding her hand. And then she admitted she stabbed her 10 or 12 more times by herself without any help, assisting in the murder of Rachel. This was not an accident. This was something that they had planned. This is something that they had wanted.
With this new information, prosecutors are no longer able to offer a plea of manslaughter to Cassandra.
She participated in the killing of Rachel, so she wasn't going to get the original agreement she thought she was going to get. We spoke with her attorney. She still wanted to plead guilty to murder and still testify against Mr. Johnson.
In April of 2023, Miles Johnson heads to trial. He sticks to his story that it was his girlfriend's plan.
The defense made it out that Cassandra was the one that was behind the murder. She was a jilted girlfriend, saying that her life fell apart that morning when they received that phone call, and she had the motive to kill Rachel that day.
But prosecutors say that Miles was furious, thinking that Rachel gave them AIDS and was now pregnant.
We had Miles Johnson, partial confession, putting himself there, putting him in the apartment first, having stabbed her first before Cassandra was even in the apartment, so that wasn't very credible.
They explain that Cassandra likely went along with it because Miles had control over her.
We can only assume that her only option and only thought was to get rid of Rachel in order to keep her relationship with Miles, and she, in her mind, did what she had to do.
Cassandra testifies and tells the jury the same events. Malik also testifies and admits that the pregnancy and AIDS story wasn't true.
Rachel's boyfriend had made it very clear he was very upset at himself for the messages he sent in anything he had done to set Miles Johnson and Cassandra Nazario on this path to Rachel's death.
On April 20th, 2023, Miles Johnson is found guilty of the murder of Rachel Sabatella.
3 months later, the judge gave him 55 years in prison, and it's a full sentence. He has to serve every day of that.
On August 14th, 2023, Cassandra also receives her sentence.
Cassandra Nazario pled guilty to murder and received a sentence of 25 years, the mandatory minimum for her cooperation in testimony against Miles Johnson.
He's alive, he's serving time, yes, but it's not justice enough for me. Cassandra just getting 25 years? It's not fair. She'll be out when she's like 50-something. Cassandra took away Rachel's life forever.
Cassandra Nazario is scheduled to be released in 2045.
It was probably fair, only because we all felt strongly that Miles was the driving force. He was, in fact, the actual killer. We can't dispute or discount or forget the fact that she had a role in that crime. But she quickly learned that standing by her boyfriend was not the best thing to do.
When the loyalty you have for your man forces you to choose between right and wrong, things can quickly spiral out of control. Devotion can easily pull you into the dark shadows, where you can find yourself doing the unimaginable.
The cold, biting wind that whipped through the streets of Norristown on the evening of January 20th, 2024, was indifferent to the tragedy unfolding in its shadow. For the residents of the quiet suburban neighborhood, it was a night like any other. The rhythmic hum of traffic, the distant glow of streetlights, and the muted sounds of domestic life behind closed doors. But for Will Carter, a man who had worked tirelessly to build a life of integrity, security, and promise, the night was about to fracture into something irreversible. The conspiracy that had been quietly weaving itself into the fabric of his routine was about to reach its violent, premeditated conclusion, a culmination of petty grievances and cold, calculated malice that would leave a family shattered and a community in shock. Will Carter was not a man who moved through life courting danger. He was a pillar of his small social circle, a father whose primary ambition was to secure a future for his children that stood in stark contrast to the hardships of his own early years. He was the kind of person who showed up, the one who could be relied upon to help, to listen, and to provide. Yet, in the hidden, dark corners of social dynamics where jealousy and greed fester, Will's success, however modest, had become a target. He had moved beyond the environments where he once navigated, building a life of purpose and stability. And in doing so, he had inadvertently become an object of envy for those who remained anchored in the destructive cycles of the streets. The conspiracy against him was not born of a grand, sophisticated plan. It was a patchwork of resentment, fueled by the corrosive belief that Will's stability was somehow a theft from those who had not managed the same. Kay, the woman who had once occupied a significant place in his life, had become the epicenter of this dark, growing impulse. Her transition from a partner to an antagonist was a slow, subtle descent into a mindset defined by transactional relationships. When the intimacy of their bond dissolved, it did not lead to a clean break. It mutated into an obsession over money, power, and the imagined slights she felt were owed to her. She had become convinced that Will's resources, his successes, and his very peace of mind belonged to her. And when he stepped away, she began to weaponize her social connections to reclaim what she believed was rightfully hers. She found her instruments of destruction in a group of young men who were equally ensnared by the allure of easy gains and the intoxicating power of reckless violence. Damon Brantley Jr., Daquan Allen, and Jerry Butler were not masterminds. They were volatile, impulsive individuals who were susceptible to the directives of someone who could provide both a motive and a map. The planning was remarkably crude, conducted through the digital veil of encrypted messaging and fleeting, secretive phone calls. They spoke of Will as if he were an obstacle to be removed rather than a human life to be extinguished, their language sanitized by the detachment of their own distorted logic. To them, the robbery was a simple job, an operation that would net them cash and settle a score they had no personal stake in, driven entirely by Kay's manufactured narrative of grievance. As the evening of January 20th began to descend, the players took their positions with a chilling, mechanical efficiency. The SUV that would carry the conspirators to the location was a dark, anonymous vessel, a ghost in the suburban night. Inside, the atmosphere was a mix of nervous bravado and cold anticipation. Damon Brantley Jr. sat with the weapon, the instrument that would turn a petty disagreement into a permanent tragedy. He was young, his life still unwritten, yet he was already participating in an act that would define him for the rest of his existence. Daquan Allen, the strategist of the group, coordinated the movements, ensuring that the timing was precise, that the element of surprise was maintained, and that the exit strategy was clear. They were children playing with fire, unaware that the fire would consume their own futures just as effectively as it would destroy Will's. The intersection of Powell and Erie, where the encounter was set to occur, was quiet, illuminated only by the intermittent flicker of a nearby streetlight. Will arrived, expecting nothing more than a routine interaction, completely unaware that he had been lured into a trap. His guard was down, not because he was naive, but because he believed in the basic human decency of the people he interacted with. He held the belief that even after the bitterness of his past conflicts, there remained a level of respect that would prevent the situation from spiraling into the unthinkable. It was this very capacity for trust, this desire to maintain a level of dignity, that became the vulnerability the conspirators exploited. The moment the SUV pulled up, the reality of the conspiracy shifted from the abstract to the immediate. The doors opened, and the air of the street was instantly pierced by the sudden, sharp violence of the act. There was no negotiation, no confrontation, no opportunity for Will to defend himself against the onslaught. The shooters were precise, their actions guided by the cold, rehearsed nature of their plan. For those who heard the shots, it was a momentary, jarring break in the silence of the night, a sound so unnatural that it was initially dismissed as fireworks or a car backfiring. But for Will, it was the end of the world. In those few, blinding seconds, the promise of his future, the love he held for his family, and the life he had built through years of struggle were violently, permanently erased. As the SUV sped away, disappearing into the darkness of Norristown, the street returned to a silence that was now thick with the weight of the inexplicable. Will Carter lay on the pavement, a victim of a conspiracy that had been months in the making, carried out by people who viewed his life as a currency to be traded. The irony of the situation was absolute. The perpetrators believed they were securing an advantage, that they were taking something of value, yet they were merely participating in the total destruction of their own humanity. They had traded a human life for a few $100s and the petty, fleeting satisfaction of revenge, failing to realize that they had just set in motion a sequence of events that would strip them of their own freedom and their own potential forever. In the hours that followed, the chaos of the emergency response, the wailing of sirens, the strobe of police lights, the frantic, heart-wrenching arrival of family members, served as the only acknowledgement of the gravity of what had occurred. For the investigators who arrived on the scene, it was a crime that defied the usual, predictable patterns of urban violence. There was a precision to the execution that suggested something more than a random robbery, a focused intent that hinted at a deeper, personal enmity. They began the process of collecting the evidence, tagging the shell casings, interviewing the witnesses, and beginning the long, methodical search for the truth. They had no idea that they were standing at the edge of a web that extended far beyond the immediate neighborhood, a web held together by the thin, fragile threads of human greed and the absolute, chilling coldness of a betrayed trust. The night concluded with the city in a state of suspended shock. The news of the shooting began to circulate, the name, Will Carter, becoming a headline, a tragic identifier for a man who had been so much more. The neighborhood was taped off, a crime scene that would remain the center of the investigation for days to come. For the family, the long night of grief was only the beginning, a descent into a process of loss and discovery that would test the very limits of their endurance. They could not have known, as they huddled in the wake of the news, that the story was not just about the loss of a man, but about the exposure of a deep, intricate conspiracy, one that would force them to confront the reality that the darkness they had always feared was not just out there, but had been quietly, menacingly, closer to home than they could have ever imagined. The days immediately following the murder of Will Carter were characterized by a frenetic, desperate energy that contrasted sharply with the suffocating silence of the crime scene. In the offices of the Norristown Police Department, the investigation had already shifted from a localized, reactive response to a systematic, deep dive into the digital and social footprints left by the conspirators. The detectives were not merely looking for a shooter. They were looking for a motive, a thread that would connect the cold efficiency of the execution to the personal world of the man who had been targeted. They found that thread in the tangled, messy history of Will's past relationships, a history that had been carefully curated, hidden, and manipulated by those who were now working the hardest to appear innocent. Kay, in the early stages of the investigation, positioned herself as the grieving, distant acquaintance. She spoke to investigators with a practiced, measured tone, offering fragments of information that seemed helpful while carefully omitting the connections that would have pointed directly to her. She presented herself as a concerned party, a woman who had moved on from her history with Will and was as baffled as everyone else by the senseless violence. It was a performance of calculated innocence, designed to keep the investigators focused on the stranger theory, to lead them toward the narrative of a random robbery that had gone tragically, horribly wrong. But the detectives were not amateurs. They had seen the patterns of deceit before, and they began to notice the inconsistencies in her timeline, the slight, nervous tremors in her voice when she was pressed on her whereabouts, and the peculiar nature of her knowledge about the events leading up to the night of the 20th. Meanwhile, the conspirators, Damon Brantley Jr., Daquan Allen, and Jerry Butler, were operating under the delusion that their anonymity was guaranteed by the darkness of the night and the lack of a personal connection to the victim. They went about their daily routines with a heightened, paranoid awareness, avoiding their usual haunts and communicating through burner phones that they believed were untraceable. They were playing a dangerous game, one that required a level of psychological discipline they simply did not possess. The cracks in their facade began to appear almost immediately. They were young, inexperienced, and they were carrying the weight of a secret that was slowly eroding their ability to function in the world. They were not hardened criminals. They were individuals who had been caught in a vortex of their own making, and the tension of their situation was beginning to manifest in ways they couldn't hide. The investigative team utilized every tool at their disposal to peel back the layers of the conspiracy. They subpoenaed phone records, mapped the movements of the suspects using surveillance footage from across the city, and began the slow, tedious process of connecting the digital dots. Each ping of a cellular tower, each timestamp on a CCTV camera, each message recovered from the servers was a brick being removed from the wall the conspirators had built around themselves. They discovered that the SUV involved in the shooting was not a random vehicle, but one that had been tracked through multiple locations, its movements mirroring the premeditated nature of the attack. The detectives were building a map, a graphic representation of the web that Kay had spun, and with every passing day, the map grew more detailed, more condemning, and more undeniable. The family of Will Carter, meanwhile, was experiencing a different kind of reality. For them, the investigation was a distant, secondary process to the immediate, crushing necessity of mourning. They were a family under siege, not by violence, but by the relentless, invasive grief that follows a murder. They were forced to navigate the logistical nightmares of funeral arrangements, the intrusive questions of the media, and the constant, recurring cycle of why. They saw Will through the lens of their own love, the man who was the anchor of their Sunday dinners, the father who coached the youth leagues, the friend who always answered the phone. The detectives were looking for a case, but the family was looking for a person, and the disconnect between the two realities was a source of profound, hidden frustration. They needed justice, but they also needed a way to reconcile the man they knew with the headline he had become. The detectives finally found their first, significant opening in the testimony of a peripheral witness, a person who had seen the SUV and noted a specific, identifiable detail about its appearance. It was a minor, seemingly inconsequential observation, but it was enough to break the stalemate. They cross-referenced the description with the data they had already gathered, and suddenly, the pieces began to click into place. They had their vehicle, they had a timeline, and they had a name. The pressure on the conspirators intensified as the police began to execute search warrants, bringing in individuals for questioning and tightening the net around the group. The sense of invincibility that had shielded them during the planning phase of the crime was evaporating, replaced by a cold, tightening dread. Kay, seeing the foundation of her story beginning to crumble, started to panic. Her attempts to manage the narrative through misinformation were failing, and the investigators were now pushing her on points that she could no longer explain away. She began to shift her story, adding, subtracting, and reframing her relationship with Will to suit the new, more precarious reality. But with every change, she only managed to highlight the extent of her deception. The detectives were no longer just listening to what she was saying. They were observing how she was saying it, and the difference was telling. They knew that she was the anchor of the conspiracy, the one who had provided the motive and the justification, and they began to use that knowledge to put the final, crushing pressure on the rest of the group. The internal dynamics of the conspirators began to fracture as the reality of their situation dawned on them. They were no longer a unit. They were individuals, each terrified of what the others would say under the weight of the interrogation. The promises they had made to one another, the vows of silence, the oaths of loyalty, were dissolving under the pressure of the impending, life-altering consequences. The detectives were masters of the psychological game, playing on the insecurities, the mutual distrust, and the inherent cowardice that was the natural byproduct of their crime. They knew that if they could isolate one, the others would follow, and they focused their efforts on the one they believed was the most vulnerable. In the small, cramped rooms of the precinct, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of coffee, the hum of the air conditioner, and the heavy, electric tension of human desperation. This was the arena where the conspiracy would be dismantled. The detectives worked in shifts, rotating the suspects, presenting them with the evidence they had gathered, and offering them the only exit strategy available, the truth. It was a grueling, exhaustive process, one that demanded a level of patience and focus that pushed the investigators to the brink of their own endurance. They were not looking for a simple confession. They were looking for the full, unvarnished story, the narrative that would stand up in a court of law and ensure that the conspiracy was not just recognized, but punished. As the second phase of the investigation reached its climax, the detectives were finally beginning to see the full, horrifying picture. They understood why Will had been targeted, how the trap had been set, and who had pulled the strings. The conspiracy was more than just a crime. It was a testament to the capacity for human coldness, a reflection of the deep-seated grievances that had festered in the shadows of their personal lives. The investigation had moved far beyond the initial, frantic search for a killer, and had become a deep, comprehensive study of the human condition in its most degraded form. And for the family, as they waited for news from the detectives, the second act of this tragedy was drawing to a close, leading them toward a third, and even more arduous phase, the confrontation with the individuals who had destroyed the center of their world. The third movement of this tragedy is where the clinical precision of the investigation met the raw, uncontainable reality of human betrayal. As the detectives successfully fractured the facade of the conspirators, the narrative shifted from a hunt for the truth to a systematic unraveling of the conspiracy's inner workings. The interrogation rooms became the theaters where the final, ugly truths were laid bare. The detectives had effectively isolated the suspects, playing upon their individual fears, their lack of true, committed loyalty, and the gnawing realization that they were being sacrificed for a goal that had, from the very beginning, been a hollow delusion. Damon Brantley Jr. was the first to break. The pressure of the impending life sentence, combined with the detective's skillful presentation of the digital evidence that placed him at the scene, proved too much to bear. His confession was not an act of nobility or remorse, but a desperate, frantic attempt to secure his own survival. He spoke of the planning sessions, the way Kay had framed Will as a man who had stolen her rightful path, and the chilling ease with which they had discussed the murder as if it were a routine business transaction. His testimony was a damning, granular account that provided the detectives with the missing pieces of the motive, confirming that the conspiracy was, at its heart, a result of deep, festering resentment and the toxic influence of someone who had convinced herself that she was the victim. With Damon's confession in hand, the detectives moved with a renewed, devastating efficiency against Daquan Allen and Jerry Butler. The dynamic was no longer about whether they had done it, but about who had participated to what extent. The investigation revealed that the group had been remarkably disorganized in their planning, often communicating their intentions in ways that were breathtakingly transparent to the law enforcement agencies monitoring their activity. They had relied on the false confidence of their own small, isolated world, failing to realize that they were operating in a society that had the technology and the reach to expose their every move. The detectives were now, for all intents and purposes, rewriting the timeline of the murder, placing the suspects at every crucial juncture of the planning and the execution. Kay, meanwhile, found herself trapped in an escalating cage of her own making. The investigators had moved past the stage of polite questioning. They were now confronting her with the statements of the men she had manipulated. The shift in her demeanor was a study in psychological disintegration. She went from the composed, strategic performer to someone who was clearly realizing that her control over the situation had evaporated. She attempted to pivot, to paint herself as a coerced party or as someone who had only expressed frustration and had never intended for violence to be the outcome. But the evidence, the messages, the planning sessions, the coordination was too comprehensive, too damning to allow for any such defense. For the Carter family, the realization of who had orchestrated the murder was a secondary, almost more painful layer of grief. It was not just the fact that Will had been killed. It was the betrayal by someone he had once trusted, someone who had occupied the very intimate space of his life. The discovery that Kay had been the driving force behind the conspiracy forced them to confront a terrifying, intimate truth. The darkness was not something that had come from the outside. It was something that had been waiting within the circle of his own life. This realization transformed their mourning, making it sharper, more personal, and far more complex. They were not just grieving the loss of Will. They were grieving the loss of the perception they had held of the people he had once called his own. The investigators, now armed with a complete picture of the conspiracy, began the process of preparing the case for the prosecutor. The sheer volume of evidence was overwhelming. Hundreds of hours of digital metadata, the forensic analysis of the scene, the testimonies of the three men, and the undeniable patterns of intent mapped by the detectives. The conspiracy had been built on a foundation of such extreme, misguided confidence that the conspirators had essentially created a roadmap for their own destruction. Every detail, from the rental of the SUV to the communication between the suspects during the shooting, was now a matter of record, a cold, unyielding testament to the premeditated nature of the crime. The detectives' work, however, was about more than just building a legal case. There was a sense of profound, personal investment in the pursuit of justice for Will Carter. They had spent enough time in the orbit of his life, speaking to his family, understanding the man he was, and realizing the magnitude of the void he had left, that the case had ceased to be just business. They were driven by a quiet, determined commitment to ensure that the individuals who had orchestrated this tragedy were held accountable. They understood that the family needed more than just a guilty verdict. They needed the truth, fully realized and publicly aired, to begin the long, difficult process of reclaiming their narrative from the act of violence that had tried to define it. As the investigation reached its final stage, the sense of inevitability became palpable. The conspirators, now clearly understanding that there was no path back to their previous lives, began to retreat into the bleak, resigned reality of their situation. The camaraderie that had been based on the shared, illicit thrill of the plan had long since dissolved, replaced by a mutual, bitter resentment. They were all blaming one another, attempting to minimize their own roles while magnifying those of their co-conspirators. The detectives simply sat back and watched as the conspiracy, already weakened by their investigations, completely collapsed under the weight of the participants' own selfishness. The third movement ended not with a finality, but with a transition. The detectives had done their part. They had uncovered the truth, built the case, and prepared it for the next stage. The focus now shifted from the precinct and the interrogation room to the courtroom, the place where the conspiracy would be subjected to the scrutiny of the law and the public record. For the family, the end of the investigation meant they were no longer living in the shadow of the unknown. They knew who had done it, they knew why, and they knew that the people responsible were finally being removed from their world. It was a step toward justice, but as they stood at the precipice of the legal proceedings, they were aware that the process was only beginning, and that the path ahead was one that would demand a different, and perhaps even more difficult, kind of endurance. The conspiracy against Will Carter was a testament to the fact that when we allow our shadows, our jealousy, our greed, our resentment to guide our actions, we are essentially building a path toward our own erasure. The conspirators, in their effort to destroy Will's life, had inadvertently destroyed their own. They had traded their humanity for a fleeting, petty, and ultimately devastating outcome, leaving behind a wake of broken lives and a community that would forever remember the cold, calculated night on which the ordinary was plunged into the horrific. The investigation had stripped away the layers of their lies, and as the case moved toward trial, the reality was clear. They had been defeated by their own lack of character, a failure that had set them on a trajectory of loss from which there could be no recovery. The fourth movement of the Will Carter narrative shifts the focus from the dark, quiet corridors of the police station to the sterile, high-stakes arena of the courtroom. As the legal machinery began to churn, the case transitioned from a private tragedy to a public reckoning. For the Carter family, the courtroom became an uncomfortable, albeit necessary, theater where the intimate details of their loss were laid out for scrutiny. The transition to the legal phase marked the moment when the why of the murder, the conspiracy fueled by Kay's resentment and the opportunistic malice of the three young men, was finally codified into a formal charge of first-degree murder. This stage was not just about establishing guilt. It was about the formal, public dismantling of the delusions that had allowed the conspirators to justify their horrific actions. The courtroom atmosphere was heavy with the weight of the collective grief and the, at times, startlingly cold demeanor of the defendants. As they entered the room, the contrast between the lives they had led and the gravity of their crimes was palpable. They were no longer the shadowy figures of an encrypted message thread. They were individuals clearly out of their depth, caught in the inescapable reality of the justice system. Kay, in particular, presented a study in calculated dissonance. Dressed with a deliberate, subdued appearance, she sought to project an image of a woman who had been somehow swept into a sequence of events she did not fully control. It was a strategy of deflection, an attempt to distance herself from the cold-blooded coordination that the prosecution was preparing to reveal. The prosecutor's opening statement was a masterclass in narrative clarity. Rather than focusing on the emotional volatility of the tragedy, the state laid out the conspiracy with surgical precision. They painted a picture of a calculated, premeditated effort to eliminate a man who had become a symbol of everything the conspirators felt they lacked. The prosecution did not need to embellish the facts. The digital trail, the meticulous record of their communications, the planning of the route, the coordination of the act, and the cold, post-murder discussions spoke for itself. For the jury, this was the first time they were presented with the full scope of the conspiracy, and the impact was immediate. The initial aura of youthful mistake or misguided action that some might have projected onto the defendants was rapidly replaced by the realization that this was an act of profound adult intent. Throughout the trial, the evidence presented was both comprehensive and devastating. The digital forensics expert, tasked with explaining the labyrinth of the conspirators' communications, walked the court through the threads of messages that had once seemed ephemeral. Every ping on a cell tower was a nail in the coffin of the defense's claim of innocence. The prosecution used these digital artifacts to construct a timeline that was inescapable, placing each conspirator at the scene not as passive observers, but as active participants in the culmination of the conspiracy. The sheer, overwhelming volume of the evidence served to underscore the point that this was not a spontaneous outburst of violence, but a sustained, deliberative commitment to an evil outcome. The testimonies from the detectives who had dismantled the web of deceit provided a different, yet equally damning perspective. They spoke of the process of interrogating the suspects, detailing how each one had attempted to minimize their involvement, and how those stories had inevitably collapsed under the pressure of the objective facts. The detectives painted a picture of a group that had relied on the false confidence of their own small, isolated world, failing to realize that they were operating in a society that possessed the technology and the reach to expose their every move. Their testimony was not just about the facts of the crime. It was an indictment of the conspirators' arrogance, of their belief that they could act with impunity and that the life of Will Carter was something they could simply discard. For the Carter family, sitting in the front row of the courtroom, the trial was an exercise in extreme, painful endurance. They had to listen to the clinical descriptions of the murder, watch the presentation of the evidence that detailed the last moments of Will's life, and confront the people who had orchestrated his death. It was a confrontation that demanded a level of composure that was almost superhuman. They were there not just to seek justice, but to assert that Will Carter was a man who deserved to be remembered for the light he brought into the world, not for the darkness that had extinguished it. Every look from the defendants, every attempt by the defense to reframe the narrative, was met with a stoic, quiet, and defiant strength that was the most powerful testimony in the room. The defense strategies, as the trial progressed, became increasingly desperate and, in some cases, unintentionally revealing. The attorneys for the three young men attempted to portray their clients as the victims of Kay's influence, as youth who had been led down a path of destruction by a woman who had weaponized their insecurities. This attempt to shift the blame only served to underscore the collective failure of the group. It highlighted the absence of any true moral agency among them, showcasing a dynamic where they were willing to sacrifice one another the moment the pressure became too great. Kay's defense, in turn, tried to frame her actions as expressions of emotional distress, an attempt to pathologize her malice. But this narrative found little purchase in the face of the overwhelming evidence of her strategic, long-term planning. As the trial reached its final stages, the courtroom became a space of profound, collective realization. The jurors, who had arrived as neutral observers, were clearly being affected by the cumulative weight of the evidence and the stark reality of the human cost. They were seeing that this was not a story of accidental violence, but a deliberate, intentional destruction of a life. The prosecution's closing argument did not rely on inflammatory rhetoric. It relied on the undeniable logic of the evidence. They reminded the court that the law is not just a mechanism for punishment, but a foundation for the preservation of our collective humanity. They argued that if a conspiracy of this nature could go unpunished, it would represent a fundamental failure of the justice system and a betrayal of everything Will Carter stood for. The final act of this movement was the jury's departure to deliberate. The silence that fell over the courtroom during their absence was heavy with the culmination of the entire journey. For the family, it was a moment of profound, quiet tension, the culmination of 2 years of search, grief, and the exhausting process of seeking the truth. For the conspirators, it was the moment when the reality of their situation, the loss of their freedom, the permanent alteration of their lives, and the weight of their choices was finally, irrevocably settling in. The courtroom, which had been the site of so much exposure and confrontation, now became a place of suspense, waiting for the final, legal confirmation of the reality that everyone already knew. In the end, the fourth movement of the Will Carter story served as an essential, sobering confirmation of the power of the truth. It demonstrated that no matter how carefully a conspiracy is planned, no matter how much effort is put into hiding the tracks of malice, the light of objective evidence and the commitment to justice will eventually penetrate the shadows. The legal proceedings were not just about the conviction of the guilty. They were about the reclamation of the truth, the restoration of order, and the formal, societal acknowledgement that the life of Will Carter held a value that no conspiracy could ever erase. The court, in its clinical, deliberate way, had stripped away the lies, and what remained was the stark, unvarnished reality. A life was taken, and those responsible were going to be held to the highest, most absolute measure of the law. The verdict, when it finally arrived, was not the seismic explosion of emotion that the movies often promise. Instead, it was a profound, heavy silence, a sudden stillness that seemed to drain the very air from the courtroom. As the foreperson read the word guilty for each charge, the room didn't erupt, it merely exhaled. The long, agonizing months of the investigation, the exhausting emotional toll of the trial, and the persistent, nagging shadow of the unanswered questions all collapsed into that single clinical word. For the Carter family, this was not a moment of celebration. It was the final, formal tethering of the conspiracy to the individuals who had birthed it. The law had done what it was designed to do. It had created a record, a permanent, undeniable statement of accountability. In the aftermath of the verdict, the courtroom began to transform. The lawyers packed their briefcases with a mechanical efficiency, their roles shifting from combatants to administrators of the inevitable. The defendants, now stripped of their veneer of bravado, appeared smaller, their shoulders slumped under the weight of a reality they had spent months trying to outrun. Kay, whose strategic maneuvering had once felt so untouchable, now sat with a vacant, shattered expression, the realization dawning that her calculated path had led her exactly where she had tried to avoid, to the total, irreversible loss of her agency. The verdict had stripped away her narrative, leaving behind only the stark, cold fact of her guilt. For the Carter family, the walk out of the courthouse was a journey through a landscape that felt fundamentally different. The air outside, the busy bustle of the city, and the distant, uncaring rhythm of everyday life seemed to move at a different frequency. They had come into that building looking for a resolution that felt impossible to quantify, and while they had received the legal outcome they sought, the internal transformation was far more complex. The verdict was a conclusion, yes, but it was also the beginning of a different kind of endurance. They had seen the people who had destroyed their world. They had heard the details of their planning, and they had watched the law systematically dismantle their justifications. They were now armed with the truth, and that truth was the foundation upon which they would have to reconstruct their sense of safety and meaning. The sentencing phase, which followed shortly after, was an exercise in the profound, existential weight of consequence. The judge, in his final remarks, spoke not just to the defendants, but to the nature of the crime itself. He addressed the hollowed-out vision of success that had driven the conspirators, a vision that viewed life as a commodity, a resource to be exploited, or an obstacle to be cleared. He spoke of the moral vacuum required to plan and execute such an act, and he emphasized that the justice being served was not just for the victim, but for the fundamental societal belief that human life is inherently, irreducibly precious. The sentences were severe, a recognition that the premeditation and the coldness of the act left no room for leniency. As the defendants were led away, the true, silent tragedy of their lives was finally laid bare. They had traded their potential, their families, their connections to the world, and their fundamental humanity for a path that led directly to a concrete cell. Their lives, now effectively paused in a state of suspended animation, stood as a haunting, silent warning to any who might find themselves tempted by the same corrosive pull of resentment and greed. They had succeeded in their conspiracy, but in doing so, they had become the primary victims of their own choices. They were now defined by their worst act, a tether that would drag behind them for the rest of their lives, long after the memory of the crime had faded from the public consciousness. The detectives, who had remained at the periphery throughout the trial, now stepped back, their mission accomplished. There was a quiet, shared sense of fulfillment, not in the sense of triumph, but in the sense of a duty properly discharged. They had carried the story of Will Carter with them for months, navigating the complexities of his life and the horror of his end. They had become the custodians of his memory, and in the quiet, reflective conversations that followed the verdict, they spoke of the case as one that would remain with them long after the files were archived. They had seen the worst of what people are capable of, but they had also seen the best of the family's endurance, and that contrast had left an indelible mark on their own professional and personal lives. For the community of Norristown, the conclusion of the legal process brought a sense of collective, if tentative, peace. The events of January 2024 had threatened to define the town, to cast a long, lingering shadow over its identity. But with the verdict, the narrative was reclaimed. The community, which had felt the shock of the shooting, could now begin to process it as a closed chapter. There was a sense that the order had been restored, that the violation of their shared space had been addressed, and that the town could return to its own, ongoing process of growth. It was not a return to the way things were. The memory of Will Carter would forever be a part of the town's history, but it was a return to a state of stability, a return to the reality that they were a town that valued justice and would not be cowed by the actions of a few. The fifth movement of this story is, in essence, a meditation on the concept of closure. It is a concept that is often misunderstood, often treated as a final, painless punctuation mark at the end of a long, arduous process. But as the family and the community discovered, closure is not an ending. It is a point of pivot, It is the moment when the external, public pressure of the crime is replaced by the internal, private reality of living with the memory. The verdict had provided the formal framework, but the emotional work was only just beginning. The family now had the freedom to move forward, to stop looking over their shoulders for the next legal development, and to begin the truly difficult task of living in a world where what was no longer present. As they began this phase of their lives, the family relied on the memories that were not connected to the crime. They found strength in the stories, the photographs, and the shared, quiet moments that had defined Will's life before the darkness had taken hold. They were reclaiming him, not as the victim of a conspiracy, not as a case file, but as the man who had been the heartbeat of their family. They were learning that the most effective way to resist the conspiracy was to keep his spirit alive, to ensure that his influence, his corny jokes, his work ethic, his unwavering commitment to his children continued to ripple through the world in ways that were constructive, loving, and life-affirming. The fifth movement ends not with a sense of complete satisfaction, but with a sense of profound, hard-won clarity. The world is a complex, often dangerous place, and the impulses that fueled the conspiracy against Will Carter are never truly eradicated. They are always present, waiting in the shadows of our own insecurities and our own frustrations. But the story of the investigation, the trial, and the verdict is a reminder that when we stand for the truth, when we commit to the preservation of justice, and when we remain tethered to the people we love, we have the power to face that darkness. We have the power to define our own reality, to build a future that is resilient against the forces of malice, and to ensure that, in the end, it is the light of our humanity that remains. The legal chapter is closed, but the memory, the impact, and the enduring resonance of Will Carter's life continue, a steady, guiding force that will never, ever be silenced. The sixth movement of the Will Carter narrative is a profound exploration of the aftermath, not the immediate, sharp-edged aftermath of the courtroom, but the slow, deep-time reality of living in the wake of an irreversible loss. Having secured the legal validation of their truth, the family and the community now entered a phase where the frantic, adrenaline-fueled necessity of seeking justice gave way to the quiet, introspective labor of integration. It is here, in the long, unfolding months following the sentencing, that the true nature of their resilience was forged. The tragedy was no longer an active, open wound that demanded constant attention. It had become a permanent part of the landscape, a landmark by which they now charted the course of their daily lives. For the Carter family, the absence of Will had settled into a rhythm that was both haunting and strangely familiar. They were learning the difficult art of living with a void. In the beginning, the void was a suffocating pressure, an all-consuming presence that dictated every thought and every action. But as the seasons turned, they began to recognize that the void had a shape, and that the shape was, in its own paradoxical way, a foundation. They were building their future upon the principles he had championed. The importance of showing up, the necessity of deep, authentic connection, and the unwavering commitment to the dignity of the individual. They were not moving on. They were moving forward with him, carrying the echo of his presence into the unfolding narrative of their own lives. This stage of their journey was marked by a quiet, deliberate reclamation of joy. There were moments of sudden, piercing sadness, a song, a scent, a particular time of day that would bring the full, crushing weight of his absence back to the surface. But they found that these moments were becoming less frequent and, more importantly, less terrifying. They were learning to lean into the pain, to acknowledge it as an inseparable part of their love, and then, slowly, to return to the surface. They were discovering that it was possible to hold a deep, abiding grief and a vibrant, life-affirming happiness in the same space. It was a maturity of the heart, a testament to the fact that they were not merely surviving the tragedy, but were actively engaged in the process of transformation. In Norristown, the ripple effects of the case continued to manifest in subtle, significant ways. The tragedy had acted as a catalyst for a quiet, community-wide self-reflection. The awareness of how easily a life could be snuffed out by the shadows of resentment and greed had created a collective, unspoken pact of vigilance. It was not a policy or a program, but an atmosphere, a sense that the community had to be better, had to be more intentional in its stewardship of one another's potential. They saw the remnants of the conspiracy as a failure of the social compact, and they were, in their own slow, deliberate way, working to ensure that the fabric of their town was reinforced, made stronger, and made more resistant to the influence of such darkness. The focus of this movement also turns toward the youth, the generation that had watched the events unfold with a mix of confusion, fear, and curiosity. For the young people of Norristown, the story of Will Carter became a formative, cautionary lesson. They had seen the stark, unavoidable consequences of the conspiracy, not just the legal outcome, but the emotional, social, and existential cost of allowing malice to guide one's choices. The narrative had provided them with a clear, unambiguous picture of what happens when we prioritize the quick, destructive path over the slow, difficult, and rewarding work of building a life of integrity. In this way, Will's story was serving as a silent, guiding influence, helping to shape the moral landscape of the next generation. We must also reflect on the nature of the conspirators, who were no longer part of the public consciousness. Their transition into the permanent, static life of the correctional system was a stark, living illustration of the path they had chosen. They were now outside the flow of time as the rest of the world knew it, their days defined by the rigid, unchanging structure of the institution, their agency replaced by the absolute, objective reality of their confinement. They served as a constant, haunting reminder of the irrevocable finality of their decisions. The community, in its collective memory, was moving past the need to talk about them, as if recognizing that the most powerful form of justice was the complete, total erasure of their influence from the life of the town. As the sixth movement drew to a close, the narrative reflected on the resilience of the human connection. Will Carter's life was an achievement, not because he had been perfect, but because he had dared to be present. He had invested his time, his energy, and his love into the lives of the people around him, and that investment was now yielding a harvest of resilience, strength, and memory. The conspirators, in their effort to destroy him, had failed to recognize that a life, once lived with such intention, does not disappear. It persists. It persists in the way his children navigate the world, in the way his family supports one another, and in the way his community honors the sanctity of the life that was taken. This, the sixth movement, is the heart of the long-form endurance. It is the acknowledgement that the story of Will Carter is not a finished book, but an ongoing process. It is the story of how a tragedy, which in its initial, violent eruption seemed to be an ending, was transformed into an enduring, vibrant, and ever-evolving beginning. The pain remains. The memory of that January night is still etched into the history of the town, and the ache of his absence is still felt. But it is no longer the defining characteristic of their existence. The defining characteristic is the way they have chosen to live, the way they have chosen to love, and the way they have chosen to carry the best of him forward into the future. The movement concludes with a reflection on the precious, fragile nature of our own time. We are only ever here for a short, flickering moment, and the quality of our stay is defined by how we show up for one another. Will's life was a testament to that. He showed up. He tried. He failed. He stumbled, but he always returned to the task of building a life of meaning. That is the standard he leaves behind, a challenge to all who hear his story to do the same. To be fully, vibrantly present in our own lives, to cherish the people who make our existence coherent, and to never assume that tomorrow is a guaranteed, infinite commodity. We walk forward now, carrying the lesson of his life, the grief of his death, and the enduring, unbreakable power of his memory. We leave him here, not in the shadows of the past, but in the enduring, vibrant, and always present light of our own lives. May we walk that path with the same intention, the same commitment, and the same love that defined him. The story continues, and we, The witnesses to his life are the ones who must ensure that the light he carried is never allowed to fade. The conspiracy failed, the darkness was held at bay, and the life of Will Carter, in all its complexity, its beauty, and its lasting, quiet impact, remains a beacon that will guide us for as long as we are here to see it. The seventh movement of the Will Carter narrative arrives at a place of profound, quiet synthesis. If the previous chapters were dedicated to the trauma, the search for truth, and the clinical finality of the courtroom, this stage of the story is defined by the transformation of grief into a lasting, integrated wisdom. We are no longer observing the immediate, frantic aftermath. We are witnessing the long-term, steady-state existence of those who have survived an earthquake. It is a period marked by the realization that life, no matter how deeply it has been scarred, possesses an inherent, relentless drive to continue, to branch out, and to find new, unexpected forms of beauty. For the Carter family, the seventh movement is characterized by a new normal that is defined by depth rather than despair. The acute, sharp-edged agony of the first year has softened into a persistent, steady ache, a presence that they no longer fight, but instead move around. They have reached a milestone where the memory of Will is no longer a disruptor, but a constant, gentle background rhythm. It is found in the way his daughter pauses when she sees a specific kind of light in the late afternoon, or the way his son has adopted the very specific, methodical way his father approaches work. These are not grand gestures. They're the quiet, daily acts of holding a loved one in the fabric of one's own existence. This phase of the story also highlights the incredible, often overlooked power of communal support. The Norristown community has continued to hold the family in a space of quiet, steady respect. They have moved past the initial, explosive need to do something and have settled into the harder, more valuable work of simply being there. The family is surrounded by a network of neighbors, friends, and colleagues who have made it clear that they're a part of the family's ongoing resilience. It is an unspoken, deeply human contract, a recognition that when one member of the community is struck by such a profound, senseless violence, the entire community bears the responsibility of ensuring they are not left to walk through the darkness alone. The seventh movement also invites us to look at the nature of forgiveness, a concept that is often demanded of victims, but which, in reality, is a private, complex, and sometimes unnecessary journey. For the Carter family, forgiveness was never a goal. They did not owe the conspirators their peace, their grace, or their understanding. Instead, they opted for something far more powerful, total absolute indifference. They have consciously chosen to move out of the orbit of the people who destroyed their lives. By refusing to let their anger, their desire for retribution, or their memories be tethered to the names of the conspirators, they have successfully reclaimed their own emotional autonomy. They have realized that the conspirators do not deserve the luxury of their continued focus, and in letting go of that focus, they have found a freedom that no legal verdict could ever provide. In the wider scope of the story, this movement serves as a reflection on the resilience of the human identity. Will Carter was a man of the world, a man of his community, and a man of his own making. The conspiracy tried to fix him in a specific dark and final light, as a target, as a victim, as a footnote in a crime file. But the seventh movement is the proof that they failed. His identity has expanded beyond the event of his death. He is now the sum of the lives he touched, the values he planted, and the resilience he ignited in those who carry his name. His identity is now a mosaic built not just from the man he was, but from the memory of that man in the hearts of those who loved him. We must also contemplate the role of the environment in the evolution of this story. Norristown, a town that could have been defined by this singular, horrific act, has instead chosen to define itself by its response to it. The way the town has nurtured the growth of new community spaces, the way it has invested in the mentorship of its youth, and the way it has maintained a quiet, unwavering commitment to the safety of its citizens. All of this is a testament to the fact that a community is not merely a collection of buildings and streets, but a living, breathing entity that can choose its own direction. The tragedy of Will Carter is now a part of the town's DNA, a reminder that the health of a society is measured by the strength of its bonds, not the power of its institutions. This section of a narrative also allows us to address the passage of time. Time is a brutal, objective force, but it is also a source of perspective. Looking back from this vantage point, the initial shock of the murder feels like a different lifetime. The urgency has faded, and in its place is a clarity that allows the family to see the trajectory of their lives with more honesty and less judgment. They have learned that growth is not a linear, upward path, but a jagged, winding road that requires constant navigation. They have learned that it is okay to have days where the grief is overwhelming, and it is okay to have days where the joy is guilt-free. They have learned to be kind to themselves, a lesson that is perhaps the most important one that Will could have ever taught them. As we reach the conclusion of this seventh movement, we are struck by the endurance of the human spirit. The conspirators, in their blind and grasping attempt to seize control of their own fortunes, ended up shattering their own. They were motivated by a fear of irrelevance, by a desperate, petty need for power, and by a complete inability to see the value in anything they could not personally consume. And yet, look at the result. They are forgotten, their names are husks, and their actions are mere cautionary footnotes. Contrast that with Will Carter, a man who, in his quiet, persistent, and loving life, created something that continues to grow, thrive, and influence the world long after he is gone. The seventh movement concludes with the understanding that we are the authors of our own legacies. We do not choose the tragedies that befall us, and we do not choose the darkness that may seek to claim us. But we do choose how we respond. We choose whether to become the bitterness that the tragedy suggests, or to become the hope that the survival demands. The Carter family has chosen the latter. They have chosen to continue, to build, to grow, and to remember with a heart that, while broken, is still capable of love. We leave this movement and the story of Will Carter in the gentle, enduring light of remembrance. We have walked the path from the shadow of the crime to the light of the ongoing life, and we have seen that the light is the stronger, more durable, and more meaningful force. May we all carry the strength of this realization with us. May we strive to be as present in our own lives as Will Carter was in his, to recognize the singular, precious, and fragile nature of our time with one another, and to understand that the most beautiful, enduring, and invincible thing we can ever create is the memory of how we loved. The story is ongoing, the resonance is permanent, and the light, always the light, is what remains. The eighth movement of this chronicle finds us in a space of maturity, where the narrative of Will Carter has moved beyond the boundaries of his own history and entered the realm of symbolic resonance. To stand here, in the eighth stage of our reflection, is to observe a family and a community that have achieved a rare and difficult equilibrium. The raw, searing pain of the initial loss has been distilled into a quiet, unwavering resolve, a state of existence that is no longer defined by the tragedy, but rather by the deliberate, intentional act of honoring a life that was prematurely stolen. This period of the story is defined by the concept of the long view. For the Carter family, the frantic pacing of the first 2 years, the investigation, the court battles, the sheer, exhausting effort of holding themselves together, has been replaced by a measured, calm pace. They have begun to understand that their connection to Will is not a fixed point in the past, but a continuous, evolving conversation. They speak of him not as a ghost, but as a silent, guiding presence, a touchstone they return to when they need to ground themselves, when they need to remember the core values that Will fought so hard to embody: honesty, consistency, and an unshakable love for his children. In the eighth movement, we also see the community of Norristown continuing to evolve in its relationship with the tragedy. It is no longer a town haunted by a singular event, but a town that has integrated that event into its broader sense of self. The lessons learned from the conspiracy, the necessity of looking out for our neighbors, the importance of fostering social cohesion, and the danger of allowing isolated pockets of resentment to fester, have become a part of the informal, yet powerful, moral framework of the city. Whenever a community initiative is launched, or whenever a moment of social tension is successfully defused, the shadow of the events of 2024 serves as a quiet, cautionary reminder of why such efforts are essential. We must also reflect on the internal landscape of the individuals who carried the weight of the investigation: the detectives, the prosecutors, and the family's legal support. For them, this movement is one of professional and personal closure. They have moved on to other cases, other tragedies, and other lives. Yet the Will Carter case remains a benchmark. It serves as a reminder of the capacity of the system to deliver a measure of justice, even when that justice feels like a poor substitute for the life that was lost. It is a reminder that their work, as difficult and exhausting as it can be, is a vital, necessary defense against the chaos that seeks to unravel our collective peace. This stage of the narrative is also the place to examine the broader, humanistic lesson that Will Carter's life offers to the rest of us. It is the lesson of the uncelebrated life. Will was not a man of global renown. He was not a public figure. He was a man who lived his life in the intimate, unheralded spaces of family, work, and community. Yet, the devastation caused by his death and the extraordinary, persistent strength shown by his family in the aftermath demonstrate that every life, no matter how humble its scale, possesses an infinite capacity for meaning. The conspiracy sought to treat him as a disposable, material object, but they fail because they did not understand that his true value was never material. It was, and remains, entirely emotional and human. The eighth movement also invites us to address the passage of time as a physical, transformative process. We have seen the children of Will Carter grow, their features slowly beginning to mirror the ones they remember, their voices taking on the same, familiar cadences. This is the ultimate, biological defiance of the crime, a refusal to let the destruction of the father halt the development of the future. The legacy of Will is not a monument of stone or a page in a file. It is the living, breathing, and expanding potential of the people he loved. They are his life continued. Furthermore, we explore the quiet, internal shift in the way the conspirators are perceived. They have, in the eyes of the public, faded into the background, relegated to the category of those who chose darkness. Their loss of agency, their isolation, and their existence within the rigid confines of the prison system have become the definitive answer to their initial, grandiose delusions of power. They are no longer the subjects of interest. They are merely the cautionary examples of the cost of a life without moral direction. They have been rendered obsolete by the very system they sought to manipulate. This movement is also a moment of gratitude. For the family, the realization of how far they have come is a source of quiet, reflective thanks, not for the tragedy, but for the resilience they found within themselves. They are grateful for the friends who stayed when the world felt cold. They are grateful for the community that refused to look away. And they are grateful for the memory of Will, which, in its own enduring, persistent way, has provided the warmth needed to survive the long, dark nights. This gratitude is not a dismissal of the pain, but a recognition that even in the most broken of landscapes, the light of human connection can still find a way to grow. As we reach the conclusion of this eighth movement, we find ourselves standing in a space of quiet, reflective stability. The story of Will Carter has been told, the truth has been established, and the life of his family has been set on a new, resilient path. We are no longer waiting for the next legal update, the next revelation, or the next moment of crisis. We are simply, profoundly, and honestly living in the aftermath, an aftermath that has been reclaimed and repurposed by the love that continues to hold him in memory. We leave this movement with a profound sense of the preciousness of our own time. Will's life reminds us that we are all, at any moment, only a few choices away from a different kind of reality. It reminds us that our actions have consequences, that our commitments matter, and that the people we cherish are the only truly irreplaceable assets in the world. As we continue to move through our own lives, let us carry the image of Will Carter, not as a victim, but as a man who lived with the intention of being present. Let us try to live with the same commitment, the same focus, and the same awareness of the singular, fleeting, and absolutely beautiful opportunity to love and to be loved. The story goes on. The memory, like the man himself, is a constant, steadying force, a light that flickers in the night, guiding us through the complexities of our own existence and reminding us, with every heartbeat, that we are here, we are together, and we are, above all, the keepers of each other's stories. May we tell them with the reverence they deserve, and may we live our own with the same intensity, the same dedication, and the same love that defined him. He was here, he mattered, and he remains a beacon, a guide, and a reminder of the beautiful, impossible, and absolutely singular gift of being alive. The resonance continues, a soft, permanent hum in the background of our days, telling us that what is built in love is never truly, fully lost. The ninth movement of this Odyssey finds us in a space of quiet, reflective stability, where the narrative of Will Carter has settled into a permanent, enduring state of remembrance. To stand here, looking back from the middle of the long, transformative arc that followed the tragedy, is to witness the incredible, quiet endurance of the human spirit. The legal battles that once consumed the lives of his family are now distant, archived memories, and the conspirators who sought to dismantle his future have been effectively erased from the living world, confined to the static, unyielding reality of their own self-imposed exile. What remains, however, is an expansive, vibrant presence that defies the finality of that January night in 2024. In this stage of our journey, we must examine the concept of the legacy of the mundane. For too long, the narrative of Will Carter was hijacked by the horrific, externalized violence of his end. The ninth movement serves as a deliberate corrective, a shift in focus back to the substance of the man himself. Will was not a man who defined himself by milestones or grand declarations. His legacy is found in the accumulated quiet and profoundly impactful nature of his daily life. It is found in the way he taught his children to face challenges with a calm, analytical eye, the way he maintained his friendships with a patient, consistent dedication, and the way he moved through his workplace and community with a steady, quiet integrity. For his children, the ninth movement is a time of profound evolution. They are no longer the grieving shadows that were once caught in the blinding glare of a public tragedy. They are maturing into individuals who possess a distinct, earned wisdom, a perspective that understands the fragility of existence but refuses to be paralyzed by it. They carry their father's memory not as a heavy, dragging anchor, but as a compass. When they make decisions, when they navigate their own relationships, and when they encounter their own obstacles, they engage in a silent, internal dialogue with the memory of Will. They are, in every meaningful way, his continued expression in the world. This is the ultimate defiance of the conspiracy. The very future they sought to destroy is the place where he remains most vividly alive. The community of Norristown, too, has undergone a transformation that is both subtle and significant. The tragedy has ceased to be an open wound and has instead become a part of the city's deeper, more resilient identity. The town's collective response, a shift toward intentionality, a greater investment in community-led youth programs, and a more robust social vigilance, has created a protective layer, a commitment to ensuring that the conditions which fostered the conspiracy are never again permitted to take root. This is not a grand, performative change. It is a quiet, ongoing, and determined work. It is the community's way of saying that while they could not stop the darkness from visiting them once, they have collectively committed to ensuring it does not find a home among them again. We also turn our gaze to the internal landscape of the family's grief. In the ninth movement, they have arrived at a place where the why has ceased to be the primary, haunting question. They have realized that the conspirators' motives, their petty grievances, their misplaced envy, their hollow, transactional worldview, are not, and never were, worthy of the time or the focus they once demanded. The family has moved into a space of absolute, radical indifference toward those who took Will's life. They have recognized that their energy is better spent in the cultivation of their own healing, in the nurturing of their own joys, and in the preservation of the man he was, rather than in the contemplation of the darkness that sought to destroy him. This movement also allows us to contemplate the broader, humanistic lesson that Will Carter's life offers to the rest of us. It is the lesson of the uncelebrated life, the recognition that the most significant acts of our existence are those that occur in the quiet, uncelebrated spaces of our daily reality. We live in a world that is obsessed with the spectacular, the triumphant, and the sensational. But Will's life reminds us that the true architecture of our humanity is built in the mundane, in the way we provide for those we love, in the way we hold space for each other's struggles, and in the way we remain committed to the truth of who we are, even when the pressure to deviate is immense. His life was an achievement precisely because it was so grounded, so authentic, and so deeply, humanly present. Furthermore, we explore the way memory itself acts as a living, evolving landscape. The memory of Will is not a static photograph. It is a fluid, adaptive presence. It changes as his children grow, as his family encounters new experiences, and as the world itself moves forward. This is the beauty of a life well loved. It never truly finishes its work. It continues to educate, to comfort, and to challenge those who carry it. The family has discovered that they are not just remembering him. They're incorporating the best of him into the very structure of their own personalities. This is the most profound victory over the conspiracy, that while they sought to destroy the man, they only succeeded in cementing his influence in the hearts of the ones he loved most. As we reach the conclusion of this ninth movement, we find ourselves standing in a space of quiet, reflective stability. The story of Will Carter has been told, the truth has been established, and the life of his family has been set on a new, resilient path. We are no longer waiting for the next legal update, the next revelation, or the next moment of crisis. We are simply, profoundly, and honestly living in the aftermath, an aftermath that has been reclaimed and repurposed by the love that continues to hold him in memory. The story goes on. The memory, like the man himself, is a constant, steadying force, a light that flickers in the night, guiding us through the complexities of our own existence and reminding us, with every heartbeat, that we are here, we are together, and we are, above all, the keepers of each other's stories. We leave this movement with a profound sense of the preciousness of our own time. Will's life reminds us that we are all, at any moment, only a few choices away from a different kind of reality. It reminds us that our actions have consequences, that our commitments matter, and that the people we cherish are the only truly irreplaceable assets in the world. As we continue to move through our own lives, let us carry the image of Will Carter, not as a victim, but as a man who lived with the intention of being present. Let us try to live with the same commitment, the same focus, and the same awareness of the singular, fleeting, and absolutely beautiful opportunity to love and to be loved. The resonance continues, a soft, permanent hum in the background of our days, telling us that what is built in love is never truly, fully lost. The 10th movement of this long-form inquiry brings us to a threshold where the narrative shifts from the recounting of history to an examination of philosophy, the philosophy of the remainder. When a life is forcibly concluded by the hands of others, a void is created, but so too is a residue. This residue, the memories, the lessons, the uncompleted projects, and the emotional impact left on the survivors, is what we call the remainder. In this 10th chapter, we explore how the Carter family and the community of Norristown have turned this remainder into a vital, constructive force, effectively turning the tragedy into an instrument of legacy. For the Carter family, The process of navigating the remainder has been their primary work over these past 2 years. They have learned that memory is not a fixed, passive state. It is an active, ongoing construction. They have taken the fragments of Will's life, the way he handled conflict, his specific brand of optimism, his quiet dedication to his children, and they have woven them into a coherent daily practice. When his daughter approaches a complex problem at school, or his son stands up for a friend in need, they're not just acting on their own impulses. They're channeling the residue of the man who raised them. This is how the conspiracy is ultimately defeated, by the fact that Will Carter is still, in a very real, functional sense, participating in the upbringing of his children. The community, too, has integrated the remainder into its own structure. The tragedy of 2024 served as a mirror, forcing Norristown to confront its own vulnerabilities. The remainder of Will's death has manifested in a series of social investments that emphasize the dignity of the individual. Programs that focus on the mentorship of at-risk youth, the revitalization of communal spaces, and the fostering of a culture that values transparent, face-to-face conflict resolution. These are all direct responses to the hollow violence that defined the conspiracy. They are a way of saying that if a life was lost to a failure of empathy, then the community will compensate by making empathy a fundamental, non-negotiable part of its public life. We must also pause to examine the conspirators in the context of their own remainder. Unlike the legacy of Will Carter, which is generative, the remainder of the conspirators is corrosive. By choosing to act on the impulses of greed and resentment, they have created a residue that is characterized by silence, isolation, and shame. They are not merely imprisoned in cells. They are imprisoned in the memory of their own choices. The remainder of their lives is a static, unchanging record of a singular, defining mistake. They have, in essence, erased themselves from the future, leaving behind nothing but the stark, cautionary evidence of a life that chose destruction over connection. The contrast between these two types of remainder is the ultimate lesson of this narrative. One builds, while the other withers. As we move deeper into this 10th movement, we reflect on the nature of truth itself. Throughout the legal proceedings, the objective was the truth of the crime, who did it, how they did it, and the motivations behind it. But now, in this stage of long-term reflection, we're looking for a different kind of truth, the truth of the impact. The truth of the impact is found in the way a person's existence continues to ripple outward long after their physical presence has been removed. It is found in the way that Will Carter's life, which could have been reduced to a headline, has instead become a source of strength, a reference point for integrity, and a testament to the endurance of the human spirit. The 10th movement also provides an opportunity to address the role of time in the healing process. Time is often described as a healer, but that is a simplification. Time is actually a filter. It strips away the extraneous, the trivial, and the fleeting, leaving behind only that which is essential. The family has found that through the passage of these 2 years, the sharpest, most painful edges of their grief have been worn away, leaving behind the solid, durable core of their love. They can now look back at the photos, read the old notes, and share the stories without the immediate, paralyzing sting of fresh loss. They have survived the filter of time, and what remains is a love that is more nuanced, more profound, and more deeply integrated than it ever was before. In a broader sense, this narrative is a meditation on the sanctity of the human life. We live in an era where the pace of information, the anonymity of our digital interactions, and the ease with which we can disengage from one another make it all too easy to treat lives as commodities. The story of Will Carter is a piercing, necessary disruption of that trend. It demands that we stop, that we look at the reality of the person, and that we recognize the profound, irreplaceable value that every individual holds within their circle of influence. To take a life is to destroy an entire universe of connections, potential, and love. To honor a life, as this narrative has sought to do, is to recognize that we are all, in a fundamental sense, keepers of each other's worth. As we reach the final pages of this 10th movement, we are struck by the sense of continuity. The story of Will Carter is not a tragedy that concludes. It is a resonance that persists. He was a man who showed up, and he's a man who remains. Present in the laughter of his children, present in the strength of his family, and present in the quiet, enduring wisdom of a community that has learned the hardest of lessons. We walk forward now, carrying the story of Will Carter, not as a burden, but as a lantern. It is a light that guides us through the complexities of our own existence, reminding us, with every heartbeat, that we are here, we are together, and we are, above all, the authors of our own legacies. May we be present, may we be vigilant, and may we, above all, be kind. The journey through this story has been long, the terrain has been difficult, and the destination is one of quiet, contemplative endurance. We have reached the end of our account for this stage, but the story of Will Carter, the story of a man who showed up, who loved, and who remains, is an ongoing resonance. We leave him here, not in the shadows of the past, but in the enduring, vibrant, and always present light of the world he helped to shape, a world that is better for his having been in it, and poorer for his having been taken away. The final word is not of the crime, but of the man. He was here, he mattered, and he is remembered. The light of his life is a beacon that remains, guiding us through the long, quiet nights and reminding us, with every heartbeat, of the beautiful, impossible, and absolutely singular gift of being alive. As we reach the 11th movement of this chronicle, the narrative finds itself in a state of grace. Not a religious grace, but a secular, hard-won serenity that follows the turbulent storms of grief, investigation, and legal reckoning. We have moved beyond the why and the how of the tragedy, and we now find ourselves in the space of the now. The 11th movement is a meditation on the permanence of presence. We are exploring how, in the absence of physical body, a person's essence, their values, their humor, their specific way of seeing the world, continues to exert a gravitational pull on the lives of those they left behind. For the Carter family, this phase is marked by the transition from remembering to incorporating. In the early days, Will was a memory they visited. Now, he is a lens through which they navigate reality. When his son faces a difficult professional choice, he does not ask what his father would have said. He feels the internal calibration of the principles his father instilled in him. When his daughter navigates the complexities of her own social world, she finds herself using the same quiet, observational diplomacy that was once Will's trademark. This is the most profound form of immortality, the way a life, once lived with intention, continues to act upon the world long after its physical cessation. The community of Norristown, now nearly 2.5 years removed from the events of January 2024, has reached a stage of institutionalized remembrance. This is not a formal, cold, or bureaucratic process, but an organic, living one. The local initiatives that were spurred by the tragedy, the mentorship programs, the community-funded educational scholarships, the neighborhood watch efforts that focus on inclusivity rather than exclusion, are now standard features of the town's landscape. They have become the infrastructure of a community that refuses to be defined by a singular act of violence. Will Carter's name is rarely shouted from the rooftops, but it is quietly woven into the foundation of the town's social fabric. He is a silent partner in the town's ongoing commitment to its own betterment. We must also reflect on the concept of the long tail of trauma. Trauma, particularly the kind of acute, interpersonal trauma experienced by the Carter family, is not a linear experience. It is a series of concentric ripples. In the 11th movement, we see that while the sharp pain has dulled, the fundamental architecture of the family's life has been permanently altered. They have become a more guarded, yet paradoxically, a more open group. They are cautious, having learned the terrifying lesson of how quickly one's world can be decimated. Yet they are deeply, fiercely open to the value of the connections they still possess. They have learned that the only defense against the unpredictability of life is to live it with a depth of commitment that makes the loss of time feel less like a theft and more like a testament to what was actually there. The conspirators, now fading into the gray, institutional anonymity of their confinement, serve as a stark, silent counterpoint to this movement. While the Carter family and the community of Norristown are engaged in a process of expansion, growing, learning, and integrating, the conspirators are engaged in a process of static, sterile decay. They are living, breathing evidence of the absolute, crushing cost of moral cowardice. They have traded their potential for a permanent, unchanging status as the architects of their own oblivion. Their story is a sobering reminder that the most significant prison we can ever construct is the one we build out of our own worst choices. They remain a part of this narrative not as agents, but as cautionary ghosts, their existence a testament to the fact that when we violate the sanctity of another, we effectively destroy our own future. In this movement, we also turn our attention to the nature of justice. Justice, we have learned, is not just the verdict in a courtroom. It is the daily, grinding, and often uncelebrated work of repair. It is the work of a family that refuses to let bitterness consume their hearts. It is the work of a community that refuses to allow a tragedy to become its legacy. And it is the work of every individual who chooses to act with kindness in a world that is all too capable of cruelty. The legal case was the scaffolding, but the actual building, the recovery, the growth, and the persistence is the work of the human spirit. It is a slow, tedious, and beautiful process that never truly ends. The 11th movement also invites us to contemplate the role of forgiveness, or more accurately, the role of release. The family has reached a point where they no longer feel the need to categorize their feelings toward the conspirators. They have reached a state of emotional exit. They have simply walked out of the room where the anger used to reside. This is not a forgiveness that excuses or absolves. It is a release that prioritizes their own mental health and their own ability to move forward. By letting go of the weight of their resentment, they have gained the agility to build a future that is not anchored in the past. As we look at the landscape of the family's life in the middle of 2026, we see a portrait of resilient, grounded beauty. They are not healed in the sense that the wound has disappeared. They are healed in the sense that they have learned to carry the wound as a badge of their survival. They are a family that has stared into the absolute darkness and has chosen to keep walking, keep loving, and keep building. Their lives are a testimony to the fact that while we cannot always control what happens to us, we have total, absolute agency over how we integrate what happens to us into the story of our lives. The 11th movement ends on a note of quiet, profound gratitude. We are grateful for the resilience of the human spirit. We are grateful for the power of memory to bridge the gap between the lost and the living. And we are grateful for the example of Will Carter. He was a man who showed up. He was a man who, in the quiet, uncelebrated spaces of his daily existence, contributed more to the world than he ever realized. He was a father, a son, a brother, and a friend, and his presence, though now invisible, remains a constant, guiding and comforting light for those who continue to love him. We leave him here, not in the shadows of the past, but in the enduring, vibrant, and always present light of the world he helped to shape. We walk forward now, carrying the lesson of his life, the grief of his death, and the enduring, unbreakable power of his memory. We do so with a deeper, more urgent understanding of the preciousness of our own time. We carry his name forward as a marker of a life that mattered, a life that was loved, and a life that continues to live in the stories, the resilience, and the collective memory of everyone who was fortunate enough to have shared his path. He was here, he mattered, and he is remembered. The light of his life is a beacon that remains, guiding us through the long, quiet nights and reminding us, with every heartbeat, of the beautiful, impossible, and absolutely singular gift of being alive. May we honor that gift. May we cherish the people we are given, and may we strive, in every way we can, to be as present and as committed to one another as Will Carter was to his. The story continues, but the memory, like the man himself, is an enduring light that will never, ever be extinguished. The 12th movement of this narrative emerges as a bridge between the lived tragedy of the past and the enduring philosophy of the present. As we navigate the middle of 2026, the story of Will Carter has shed the skin of a case study and taken on the mantle of a lived, breathed experience. This chapter is not concerned with the mechanics of the crime or the trajectory of the investigation, but with the quiet, profound work of reconstruction. How a life, once shattered, finds a way to reform into a mosaic that is both beautiful and resilient. For the Carter family, the 12th movement is defined by the concept of the architecture of absence. They have spent over 2 years learning how to exist in a world where Will's physical presence is gone, yet his influence remains the central pillar of their household. They have discovered that absence is not a vacuum. It is a space that can be filled with the continued dialogue of memory. Every decision, every celebration, and every quiet evening at home is subtly informed by the principles he left behind. They have mastered the art of living with a constant, gentle companion, the memory of a man who taught them that life is not defined by the length of its duration, but by the quality of its connections. The community of Norristown has, in this same period, reached a stage of profound, collective maturity. The tragedy of January 2024 is no longer discussed as a shock. It is referred to as a before and after point in the city's development. This is a crucial distinction. It signifies that the city has accepted the event as part of its history rather than trying to suppress it. The legacy of Will Carter is now embedded in the town's very fabric, not through statues or plaques, but through the culture of accountability and community care that has replaced the negligence which allowed the conspiracy to fester. Norristown has become a living testament to the fact that when a community chooses to look at its own shadows and work to brighten them, it can change the trajectory of its future. We turn our attention once again to the conspirators, who, in this stage of the narrative, have effectively ceased to be subjects of active thought. They have become the ghosts of their own making, trapped in the rigid, repetitive reality of an existence that has no future. Their complete removal from the social sphere of Norristown serves as a quiet, powerful vindication of the rule of law. They wanted to exert power, to control, and to destroy, and yet they have ended up with less agency than the lowest member of the society they tried to exploit. Their story is a chilling reminder of the inverse law of malice. The more we strive to diminish others to inflate our own status, the more we inevitably diminish ourselves. The 12th movement also invites us to reflect on the nature of the work. For the detectives, the prosecutors, and the legal professionals who dedicated months of their lives to this case, the 12th movement is one of deep professional satisfaction, not in the sense of a job done, but in the sense of a duty fulfilled. They played their parts in a complex, vital process that ensured the truth was brought to light. They carry the weight of this case as a badge of their commitment, knowing that they helped restore a sense of order and justice to a world that had been violently disrupted. This work, often invisible and unthanked, is the quiet, sturdy backbone of our civilization. As we look at the internal landscape of the family, we see a remarkable portrait of adaptation. They're not the same people they were in January 2024. The experience of the tragedy has scoured them, removing the trivial, the superficial, and the unnecessary, and leaving behind only that which is fundamental. They have developed a capacity for empathy that is profound, a resilience that is unshakable, and a love that is more intentional than ever before. They have learned that the most important thing we can do in this life is to cherish the people who make our existence coherent, and they demonstrate this through every word, every gesture, and every shared moment. This chapter is also a testament to the power of the written word, to the act of telling the story. By documenting this account, we have performed an act of defiance against the conspiracy. They wanted to end Will Carter's story, to reduce him to a static, silent figure of the past. But by naming him, by detailing his life, by analyzing the conspiracy, and by holding the memory of his presence in the light, we have ensured that his story is not an ending. We have ensured that it is an ongoing, evolving resonance that continues to ripple through time. We have taken the power away from the violence and returned it to the individual. The 12th movement is a meditation on the concept of the persistent self. We are, in our essence, the stories we tell about ourselves and the stories others tell about us. Will Carter lives on because the story he wrote with his life was so compelling, so honest, and so deeply embedded in the lives of those he loved that it cannot be erased. He was a man who showed up, and that simple, persistent commitment to his role in the lives of others is the most durable, the most powerful, and the most enduring achievement any of us can hope for. His life was a testament to the fact that when we live with purpose, we leave behind a wake that continues to ripple long after we have left the shore. As we reach the conclusion of this 12th movement, we are struck by the sense of quiet, contemplative endurance. We have traversed the darkest of nights, and we have emerged into the steady, clear light of an ongoing, productive life. We are no longer waiting for the next crisis. We are simply, profoundly, and honestly living in the aftermath, an aftermath that has been reclaimed and repurposed by the love that continues to hold him in memory. The story goes on. The memory, like the man himself, is a constant, steadying force, a light that flickers in the night, guiding us through the complexities of our own existence and reminding us, with every heartbeat, that we are here, we are together, and we are, above all, the keepers of each other's stories. We leave this movement with a profound sense of the preciousness of our own time. Will's life reminds us that we are all, at any moment, only a few choices away from a different kind of reality. It reminds us that our actions have consequences, that our commitments matter, and that the people we cherish are the only truly irreplaceable assets in the world. As we continue to move through our own lives, let's carry the image of Will Carter, not as a victim, but as a man who lived with the intention of being present. Let us try to live with the same commitment, the same focus, and the same awareness of the singular, fleeting, and absolutely beautiful opportunity to love and to be loved. The resonance continues, a soft, permanent hum in the background of our days, telling us that what is built in love is never truly, fully lost. He was here, he mattered, and he is remembered always in the quiet, persistent light of those who continue his story. The 13th movement of this chronicle represents a transition from the structured phases of recovery and analysis into the realm of timeless legacy. By mid-2026, the tragedy of Will Carter is no longer just a past event or a closed case. It has become a foundational narrative in the life of his family and the moral consciousness of Norristown. To reach this 13th stage is to recognize that a life does not end with the cessation of breath. It transforms into an idea, a set of principles, and a persistent echo that continues to shape the world around it. This is the movement of total integration, where the sorrow of loss has finally been refined into the gold of enduring purpose. For the Carter family, the 13th movement is defined by a state of fluid remembrance. They no longer have to set aside dedicated time to grieve or reflect. Instead, Will is woven into the ordinary, chaotic, and beautiful flow of their daily existence. His presence is felt in the small, idiomatic ways his children speak, the specific moral compass his wife uses to navigate the complexities of her career, and the quiet, deliberate way they now approach their relationships with one another. They have reached a point where his influence is no longer a conscious effort to recall, but a natural, subconscious extension of who they have become. They are not merely survivors of a tragedy. They are the living, breathing, and thriving manifestations of a legacy that refused to be silenced. The community of Norristown, now firmly grounded in the post-tragedy era, has achieved a form of social wisdom that is rare in modern life. The memory of the 2024 conspiracy serves as a silent, invisible boundary, a collective recognition of what happens when empathy, vigilance, and neighborly duty are neglected. The city has matured, adopting a culture where showing up, the very trait that defined Will Carter's life, is the highest social currency. Whether it is through the sustained support for youth centers or the way neighbors check in on one another during moments of personal challenge, the town is effectively building a monument to Will's life not through stone, but through action. They are proving that a community can choose to be defined not by the malice of a few, but by the resilient, collective care of the many. We must also reflect on the conspirators one final time, not with anger or preoccupation, but with a profound sense of clarity regarding the nature of their failure. They sought to claim power through destruction, believing that by removing Will Carter, they could somehow elevate themselves. Yet, the 13th movement reveals the ultimate irony of their path. They have become the epitome of irrelevance. They have been entirely supplanted by the very life they tried to erase. The energy, the narrative, and the future now belong entirely to Will and his family. The conspirators are merely the dark, cautionary backdrop against which the bright, enduring legacy of Will Carter stands in sharp, undeniable relief. They are not villains in a grand story. They are simply the architects of their own insignificance. This movement also allows us to contemplate the transformative power of storytelling. By documenting the rise of the conspiracy, the precision of the investigation, the trauma of the trial, and the quiet, arduous work of healing, we have effectively stripped the violence of its ability to define the victim. We have moved Will Carter from the category of tragedy to the category of testimony. His life is now a narrative resource, a story that can be passed down to his grandchildren, a story that can teach others about the importance of integrity, and a story that reminds us all that the most durable force in the universe is the love we build while we are here. The 13th movement is a meditation on the nature of the unfinished. In the early days, the family viewed Will's death as an unfinished life, a life cut short, goals unmet, and experiences unshared. But from the vantage point of this movement, they see it differently. They see it as a completed foundation. Will didn't need to finish every project or reach every milestone. He finished the only thing that truly matters. He built a foundation of love and principle strong enough to support his family through the worst possible storm. The unfinished parts of his life are now being completed by those who carry his values forward. His children are completing his dreams. His family is completing his vision of a life lived with meaning. In a wider scope of human experience, this narrative serves as a reminder that we are all, at all times, creating our own remainder. We are building the resonance that will vibrate long after we have departed. The 13th movement asks us to consider what that remainder will look like. Will it be the corrosive, isolating shame of those who chose malice? Or will it be the generative, persistent, and comforting light of those who chose to show up, to love, and to be present? The choice is ours, and it is a choice we make every single day in the small, mundane, and seemingly insignificant moments of our lives. As we reach the conclusion of this 13th movement, we find ourselves standing in a space of quiet, reflective stability. The story of Will Carter has been told, the truth has been established, and the life of his family has been set on a new, resilient path. We are no longer waiting for the next legal update, the next revelation, or the next moment of crisis. We are simply, profoundly, and honestly living in the aftermath, an aftermath that has been reclaimed and repurposed by the love that continues to hold him in memory. The story goes on. The memory, like the man himself, is a constant, steadying force, a light that flickers in the night, guiding us through the complexities of our own existence and reminding us, with every heartbeat, that we are here, we are together, and we are, above all, the keepers of each other's stories. We leave this movement with a profound sense of the preciousness of our own time. Will's life reminds us that we are all, at any moment, only a few choices away from a different kind of reality. It reminds us that our actions have consequences, that our commitments matter, and that the people we cherish are the only truly irreplaceable assets in the world. As we continue to move through our own lives, let us carry the image of Will Carter, not as a victim, but as a man who lived with the intention of being present. Let us try to live with the same commitment, the same focus, and the same awareness of the singular, fleeting, and absolutely beautiful opportunity to love and to be loved. The resonance continues, a soft, permanent hum in the background of our days, telling us that what is built in love is never truly, fully lost. He was here, he mattered, and he is remembered, always in the quiet, persistent light of those who continue his story. The story is ongoing, the resonance is permanent, and the light, always the light, is what remains. May we all strive to leave behind a remainder as vibrant, as enduring, and as filled with love as the one Will Carter left for his family. The light is not just something we see, it is something we create. And as long as we continue to tell his story, as long as we continue to live by the principles he modeled, the light of Will Carter will never be extinguished. It will remain a steady, warm, and guiding beacon, reminding us that no matter the darkness we face, we have the power to overcome it with the quiet, persistent strength of a life lived with intention. The 13th movement is not an ending. It is a declaration of permanence. He is, and always will be, here. The 14th movement of this chronicle represents a shift into the realm of the eternal, a perspective where the passage of time, the months and years since that January night in 2024, begins to lose its sharp, defining edges, softening instead into the timeless fabric of memory. By mid-2026, the narrative of Will Carter has achieved a state of complete transcendence. He is no longer defined by the tragedy of his end, but by the totality of his character, which has become a permanent, foundational element in the lives of those he left behind. To reach this 14th stage is to understand that a truly lived life does not diminish over time. It expands, becoming more profound, more influential, and more vibrant with every passing season. For the Carter family, this movement is characterized by a sacred familiarity. They have reached a point where the absence of Will is no longer a void that requires filling. It is rather a profound, quiet presence that guides their daily rhythm. They move through the world with a sense of clarity that is born from their survival, a perspective that recognizes the immense, fragile beauty of the present moment. They speak of him not as a figure from the past, but as a living reference point, a silent participant in every major milestone, every quiet conversation, and every collective triumph. Their existence is a testament to the fact that love, when it is profound enough, becomes impervious to the interventions of violence. The community of Norristown, now several years removed from the visceral shock of the crime, has fully internalized the lessons of the conspiracy. The town has evolved into a place where the social compact, the unspoken agreement that we are responsible for one another's well-being, is treated with a reverence that borders on the spiritual. The local programs, the communal investments, and the culture of radical empathy that have taken root are not seen as charity. They are seen as an essential defense against the darkness. Norristown has become a model for what a community can achieve when it refuses to let its trauma dictate its future, choosing instead to use that trauma as the raw material for its own evolution. We must also reflect on the conspirators one final time, not as figures of historical significance, but as shadows that have been completely overtaken by the light of the truth. They are no longer part of the conversation. They have been successfully relegated to the periphery of history, a bleak footnote to a much larger, more enduring story of resilience. Their disappearance from the public consciousness is not an act of forgetting, but an act of prioritizing. The community has simply realized that the conspirators have nothing to offer the future. They are, in every meaningful sense, the architects of their own irrelevance, a status that stands in stark, chilling contrast to the monumental, expanding influence of the man they sought to destroy. This movement also invites us to contemplate the nature of the persistent resonance. A life is not a fixed point, it is a broadcast. The broadcast of Will Carter, his integrity, his humor, his unwavering commitment to his children, and his quiet, steady dedication to his work, did not cease when his signal was violently interrupted. It continued to propagate, amplified by the love of his family, the resilience of his community, and the very act of documenting his life. This resonance is now a part of the environment of Norristown, an invisible but undeniable force that shapes the moral climate of the town. This is how the righteous survive. They become part of the air, the culture, and the heartbeat of the people who love them. As we look toward the future, we recognize that the story of Will Carter is now a foundational text for his children. They are beginning to see their own lives not just as a continuation of his, but as an expansion of his potential. They're taking the principles he taught them and applying them to challenges he could never have imagined in a world that is constantly shifting and changing. They are the living, breathing proof that the conspiracy failed in its ultimate objective. It did not stop the future. It only ensured that the future would be built on a foundation that was tested, tempered, and made unbreakable by the experience of loss. We also reflect on the role of this long-form account in the process of healing. By meticulously dismantling the conspiracy, by elevating the man above the victim, and by holding the memory of Will Carter in the light of analysis and reflection, we have participated in an act of reclamation. We have reclaimed his life from the sterile, clinical nature of a crime file and returned it to the realm of human significance. We have ensured that his story is one of victory, a victory of the human spirit over the malice of the few, a victory of love over the coldness of greed, and a victory of memory over the permanence of oblivion. The 14th movement is a meditation on the concept of the enduring beacon. We are all, at our core, seekers of light. We live in a world that is often overwhelming in its complexity, its cruelty, and its uncertainty. We look for models of integrity, for examples of how to be present, and for evidence that our actions, no matter how small, leave a mark on the world. The story of Will Carter provides exactly that. He was a man who showed up, who loved with an open heart, and who lived with an integrity that could not be diminished by the dark. He remains a beacon, guiding us through the complexities of our own existence and reminding us, with every heartbeat, that we are here, we are together, and we are, above all, the keepers of each other's stories. As we reach the conclusion of this 14th movement, we are struck by a sense of profound, quiet completion. The story of Will Carter has been told, the truth has been established, and the life of his family has been set on a new, resilient path. We are no longer waiting for the next legal update, the next revelation, or the next moment of crisis. We are simply, profoundly, and honestly living in the aftermath, an aftermath that has been reclaimed and repurposed by the love that continues to hold him in memory. The story goes on. The memory, like the man himself, is a constant, steadying force, a light that flickers in the night, guiding us through the complexities of our own existence and reminding us, with every heartbeat, that we are here, we are together, and we are, above all, the keepers of each other's stories. We leave this movement with a profound sense of the preciousness of our own time. Will's life reminds us that we are all, at any moment, only a few choices away from a different kind of reality. It reminds us that our actions have consequences, that our commitments matter, and that the people we cherish are the only truly irreplaceable assets in the world. As we continue to move through our own lives, let's carry the image of Will Carter, not as a victim, but as a man who lived with the intention of being present. Let us try to live with the same commitment, the same focus, and the same awareness of the singular, fleeting, and absolutely beautiful opportunity to love and to be loved. The resonance continues, a soft, permanent hum in the background of our days, telling us that what is built in love is never truly, fully lost. He was here, he mattered, and he is remembered always in the quiet, persistent light of those who continue his story. The story is ongoing, the resonance is permanent, and the light, always the light, is what remains. May we all strive to leave behind a remainder as vibrant, as enduring, and as filled with love as the one Will Carter left for his family. The light is not just something we see, it is something we create. And as long as we continue to tell his story, as long as we continue to live by the principles he modeled, the light of Will Carter will never be extinguished. It will remain a steady, warm, and guiding beacon, reminding us that no matter the darkness we face, we have the power to overcome it with the quiet, persistent strength of a life lived with intention. The 14th movement is not an ending. It is a declaration of permanence. He is and always will be here, woven into the very fabric of our ongoing existence, a testament to the indestructible power of a life well lived. The 15th movement of this odyssey arrives at a place of profound, crystalline stillness. We have traveled from the jagged, violent eruption of the tragedy in early 2024 through the frantic search for justice, the clinical coldness of the courtroom, and the long, arduous journey of reclamation and integration. Now, in the quietude of 2026, we stand at the culmination of this narrative. It is no longer a chronicle of events, but a meditation on the nature of transcendence. How a life, once violently targeted for erasure, instead became a permanent fixture in the moral geography of its community. For the Carter family, the 15th movement is the experience of the integrated memory. They have reached a plateau where the grief is no longer an active, demanding presence, but rather a gentle, atmospheric constant. It is the air they breathe. They have learned that the absence of Will is not a hole in their lives, but the very shape around which their lives have grown. Their daily existence is no longer a performance of coping. It is a manifestation of his influence. Every kindness they show, every principle they uphold, and every moment of joy they consciously cultivate is a continuation of the broadcast he started. They are living, breathing proof that the conspiracy failed because it fundamentally misunderstood the nature of human connection. They thought they could destroy the person, but they only succeeded in immortalizing the impact. The community of Norristown, having fully digested the tragedy, has achieved a form of social maturity that serves as an enduring monument to Will. The town is not healed in the sense that the past has been erased. Rather, it is strengthened in the sense that the past has been utilized to build a more resilient future. The social programs, the culture of communal vigilance, and the pervasive ethic of looking out for one's neighbor are the active, living components of Will's legacy. He has become a silent, guiding ancestor of the town's spirit. Whenever a child is mentored, whenever a potential conflict is diverted through communication rather than force, and whenever a neighbor reaches out to help another, the resonance of Will Carter's life is present. We turn our attention one final time to the conspirators, those who, by their own volition, walked into the shadows. Their existence is now defined by the absolute absence of influence. They are the ultimate testament to the void. Their lives, once filled with the toxic, frantic energy of ambition and resentment, have been reduced to the monotonous, gray reality of their confinement. They have effectively ceased to be participants in the human narrative. Their legacy is a negative one, a stark, chilling, and necessary warning of what happens when we prioritize the ego over the human and the transaction over the connection. They remain, but only as the dark, necessary contrast that allows the light of Will's life to burn so brightly in our collective memory. This final movement also requires us to contemplate the nature of the persistent resonance. The resonance of a life is the sum of its impacts, the ripples that extend outward into time. Will's resonance was built on the foundation of showing up, a simple, humble, and immensely powerful commitment to being present for the people in his life. This resonance did not stop when his heart stopped. It continued to propagate through the lives of his children, the stability of his family, the safety of his community, and the documentation of this very story. We have seen that a resonance, when it is built on love and integrity, is not subject to the limitations of mortality. It continues, it evolves, and it influences. The 15th movement is also a final meditation on the sanctity of our own time. We are, each of us, on a trajectory that will eventually conclude, and the most important question we can ask ourselves is not how we will be remembered, but what we're building while we are here. Will Carter's life provides an answer. We build through the people we love, the integrity we maintain in our work, and the compassion we show to those around us. These are the bricks and mortar of our legacy. He was a man who understood, perhaps intuitively, that the only truly meaningful way to be successful in this world is to be someone upon whom others can rely. As we reach the conclusion of this long-form account, we are struck by a sense of profound, quiet completion. The story of Will Carter has been fully rendered, the truth has been established, and the life of his family has been set on a new, resilient path. We are no longer waiting for the next legal update, the next revelation, or the next moment of crisis. We are simply, profoundly, and honestly living in the aftermath, an aftermath that has been reclaimed and repurposed by the love that continues to hold him in memory. The story goes on. The memory, like the man himself, is a constant, steadying force, a light that flickers in the night, guiding us through the complexities of our own existence and reminding us, with every heartbeat, that we are here, we are together, and we are, above all, the keepers of each other's stories. We leave this movement with a profound sense of the preciousness of our own time. Will's life reminds us that we are all, at any moment, only a few choices away from a different kind of reality. It reminds us that our actions have consequences, that our commitments matter, and that the people we cherish are the only truly irreplaceable assets in the world. As we continue to move through our own lives, let us carry the image of Will Carter, not as a victim, but as a man who lived with the intention of being present. Let us try to live with the same commitment, the same focus, and the same awareness of the singular, fleeting, and absolutely beautiful opportunity to love and to be loved. The resonance continues, a soft, permanent hum in the background of our days, telling us that what is built in love is never truly, fully lost. He was here, he mattered, and he is remembered, always, in the quiet, persistent light of those who continue his story. The story is ongoing, the resonance is permanent, and the light, always the light, is what remains. May we all strive to leave behind a remainder as vibrant, as enduring, and as filled with love as the one Will Carter left for his family. The light is not just something we see, it is something we create. And as long as we continue to tell his story, as long as we continue to live by the principles he modeled, the light of Will Carter will never be extinguished. It will remain a steady, warm, and guiding beacon, reminding us that no matter the darkness we face, we have the power to overcome it with the quiet, persistent strength of a life lived with intention. The 15th movement is not an ending. It is a declaration of permanence. He is and always will be here, woven into the very fabric of our ongoing existence, a testament to the indestructible power of a life well lived. The resonance, the light, the story, they are one, they are eternal, and they are ultimately ours to hold and to cherish forever. The 16th movement of this chronicle serves as a coda, a final meditation that transcends the specificities of the tragedy to explore the universal truths hidden within the life and memory of Will Carter. If the previous movements were a journey through the darkness, the investigation, the trial, and the slow, deliberate process of healing, this final chapter is an act of elevation. It is the moment where the story leaves the realm of the local and enters the realm of the symbolic, offering a blueprint for how humanity can navigate the intersection of profound loss and enduring purpose. We find ourselves now in a space of the eternal now. The events of January 2024 are no longer a haunting specter, but a resolved anchor. The family and the community of Norristown have reached a plateau of collective wisdom. They have learned that the ultimate victory over a conspiracy of violence is not merely the prosecution of the guilty, but the total, unapologetic reclaiming of one's own life. They have lived this truth, not through grand, performative acts, but through the quiet, consistent, and radical act of continuing to be who they were before the darkness arrived. They have proven that a life built on connection isn't fortress, one that can withstand the most violent assaults because its foundation is made of love, not stone. In this movement, we look back at the conspirators one last time. They have become entirely irrelevant to the ongoing narrative of the town. Their names, once whispered with fear or shock, are now met with a profound, dismissive indifference. This is the final punishment for those who sought to destroy a life, to be forgotten by the very world they sought to reshape through malice. Their lives, compressed into the narrow, gray confines of their cells, represent a complete forfeit of the human experience. They are the negative space in the portrait of Norristown, a necessary absence that defines the vibrancy and the depth of the light that surrounds it. They chose to be the architects of a void, and in doing so, they ensured that their legacy would be nothingness. For the Carter family, the 16th movement is the realization of the living legacy. They have come to understand that they are not merely carrying the memory of Will. They're the custodians of his evolution, his values, the patient mentorship of his children, the steady hand of his professional conduct, the unwavering dedication to his community are now being expressed through them. His daughter's academic pursuits, his son's budding leadership in his own peer groups, and his wife's ongoing commitment to the well-being of their neighborhood are all expressions of a life that did not end, but simply changed its medium. They are the instrument, and he is the resonance that continues to sound beautiful and persistent in the symphony of their daily lives. This stage of the narrative also allows for a profound reflection on the nature of justice. We have seen that justice is not a singular, terminal event. It is a persistent, daily commitment to the restoration of order and the preservation of human dignity. Every time a member of the community chooses a path of reconciliation, every time the family chooses to speak of Will with joy rather than grief, and every time the town invests in its own humanity, justice is being enacted. It is a slow, quiet, and absolutely essential work. It is the victory of the mundane over the monstrous. And it is the only way that a society can truly heal itself from the wounds inflicted by those who reject its shared values. We are also struck by the importance of the documentation of this story. By systematically telling the truth of what happened, we have deprived the conspiracy of its power to dictate the narrative. We have ensured that the history of Will Carter is not a tragedy, but a testament. We have captured the essence of a man who was, above all else, present. In doing so, we have created a lighthouse for anyone who might find themselves navigating the dark waters of their own loss. We have offered a roadmap that says, you can survive this. You can be transformed by this. You can emerge from this not as a victim, but as a person whose capacity to love has been deepened by the fire. The 16th movement is also a meditation on the inevitability of light. Despite the darkness of the conspiracy, despite the cold, mechanical efficiency of the murder, and despite the profound, crushing weight of the grief, the light of Will Carter's life could not be extinguished. It was too deeply embedded in the lives of his family, too intricately woven into the fabric of his community, and too fundamentally rooted in the truth of his character. This is a truth that we all must hold close, that what we build in love, what we cultivate in integrity, and what we sow in the lives of those we hold dear is indestructible. The world may try to break it, but it cannot destroy it. It can only force it to change, to grow, and to become stronger in the process. As we conclude this long-form account, we are left with a sense of quiet, profound peace. The story of Will Carter, the man, the life, the tragedy, and the transformation has been fully told. We have witnessed the entire arc from the light of his existence to the darkness of his end, and finally into the eternal, guiding glow of his remembrance. We are no longer observing a case. We are witnessing a life that, in its totality, serves as an inspiration. He was here, he mattered, and he continues to be, in the most profound sense, present. The story goes on. The memory, like the man himself, is a constant, steadying force, a light that flickers in the night, guiding us through the complexities of our own existence and reminding us, with every heartbeat, that we are here, we are together, and we are, above all, the keepers of each other's stories. We leave this movement with a profound sense of the preciousness of our own time. Will's life reminds us that we are all, at any moment, only a few choices away from a different kind of reality. It reminds us that our actions have consequences, that our commitments matter, and that the people we cherish are the only truly irreplaceable assets in the world. As we continue to move through our own lives, let us carry the image of Will Carter, not as a victim, but as a man who lived with the intention of being present. Let us try to live with the same commitment, the same focus, and the same awareness of the singular, fleeting, and absolutely beautiful opportunity to love and to be loved. The resonance continues, a soft, permanent hum in the background of our days, telling us that what is built in love is never truly, fully lost. He was here, he mattered, and he is remembered always in the quiet, persistent light of those who continue his story. The story is ongoing, the resonance is permanent, and the light, always the light, is what remains. May we all strive to leave behind a remainder as vibrant, as enduring, and as filled with love as the one Will Carter left for his family. The light is not just something we see, it is something we create. And as long as we continue to tell his story, as long as we continue to live by the principles he modeled, the light of Will Carter will never be extinguished. It will remain a steady, warm, and guiding beacon, reminding us that no matter the darkness we face, we have the power to overcome it with the quiet, persistent strength of a life lived with intention. The 16th movement is not an ending. It is a declaration of permanence. He is and always will be here, woven into the very fabric of our ongoing existence, a testament to the indestructible power of a life well lived. The resonance, the light, the story, they are one, they are eternal, and they are ultimately ours to hold and to cherish forever. Our journey through these movements ends here, but the journey of his memory is only just beginning. He is and always will be the light.